listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Happy Hump Day.
Happy Hump Day. Hump Day is always nice.
How you doing this morning?
So far, so good. Can't complain. How you doing this morning?
You know,
You
pretty
seem
good.
more awake
Yeah,
this morning.
that's the thing.
Yeah.
I was going to get there. So I actually got like 4 hours of sleep last night.
Nice.
And I find if you get 8 hours, it's good.
Yeah.
If you get 4 hours, you're also good, but you'll crash around lunchtime.
Yeah. Which is fine, right?
You go
'Cause at
5,
that point,
6
we're-
hours or so, you're just drowsy.
Yeah.
So it's fine. I'm just breaking up my nights
It's funny.
now.
I've gotten used to basically functioning on like 4 hours of sleep. I mean, like when I
For
say
the full day.
Yeah, typically.
Then you
Eventually,
need to play catch up.
yeah, eventually you'll play catch up. Like you'll fall asleep on the weekend or something like that, and you're just asleep the entire weekend. I don't know why I'm so tired this weekend. But no, you eventually get used to it. Your body just kind of gets adjusted to it. I am horrible early in the morning. I'm great later at night. So 2, 3 in the morning, I'm still fine. But no, it was always difficult for me to get up first thing in the morning. And so it never changed. Like it's burning the candles at both ends. But eventually there's a point where you're just kind of like, you're out of it. And it's like, you can't function, you can't, yeah.
So good to know that, I mean, I'm a night owl through and through.
Yeah.
So good to know that it doesn't change.
No,
no
it doesn't
matter
change.
how often you wake up at 5:30 to come in and do live radio,
Doesn't change.
it doesn't change.
Doesn't change at all. You're still that same night owl. It's, 12 at night, and you're like, all right.
Still contemplating
I need
in
to-
your bed,
Yeah.
do I really have to go in today?
right.
Every single day.
Because sometimes you're playing, like, for me, Galactic Civ, right? And it's like, it goes into the night, and you're like, all right, one more move. And then it points like 2 in the morning, right? But no, you get used to it. You just try to make up your time at other times. At least for me,
All right.
anyway. People are different.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to nap after just for a little bit to recuperate, but so far, this is the first day I've probably gotten 4. I've
Yeah.
gotten like 5 or 6.
Yeah, you look very awake today.
Well, I guess I got to sleep less. Move on to headlines, though. In COVID news, 2 days ago in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 76% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the US of A and killed 904,144 people. Governor Kathy Hochul will drop New York's stringent indoor mask mandate on Wednesday, ending a requirement that businesses ask customers for proof of full vaccination or require mask wearing at all times, and marking a turning point in the state's coronavirus response. The decision will eliminate a rule that prompted legal and interpersonal clashes over mask wearing, especially in conservative parts of New York. It was set to expire on Thursday and would have required renewing. Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, and Oregon announced Monday that masks will soon no longer be required indoor or in schools. California Governor Gavin Newsom will let the state's indoor masking mandate end for vaccinated people on February 15th, although school children and the unvaccinated will still need to wear masks. Does that mean they check everyone's cards?
I have no idea. That's what it sounds like.
I remember when this was all coming out and they were equating it to Nazi internment camps.
Yeah, which is...
They were saying like, oh, where are my papers? Huh? you need that?
There's a big difference between segregating somebody based on their racial persuasion or at the very least some kind of racist intent versus, a virus.
Just a little.
Yeah.
Just a little.
Tiny
But
bit.
several families, this is national news, several families whose loved ones died or were injured while trying to escape a smoke-filled Bronx apartment building sued the owners Tuesday, alleging safety violations that led to the wrongful death of 17 people, including 8 children. The 5 lawsuits were filed on behalf of the families by Benjamin Crump, a civil rights attorney based in Florida, and the New York law firm Wetz and Luxembourg. While the fire damaged only a small part of the building, it produced caustic smoke that quickly engulfed the complex. The suffocating smoke rose through a stairwell of the 19-story building and killed people as they attempted to flee. The parents of Amir Locke, a 22-year-old black man killed during a police raid in Minneapolis last week, are calling for an end to no-knock warrants in the city, describing them as a failure of law enforcement. Locke was shot as a SWAT team executed a warrant at an apartment last week. A short video clip of the incident shows police entering the apartment and shouting commands as Locke, who appeared to be sleeping, gets up holding a gun his family said he legally owned. Police then fired. Quote, he didn't even see what was coming. He couldn't see who took his life, end quote, Locke's father said. Describing how his son usually slept on his stomach with a cover over his head, Locke was not named in the warrant. I think we need to return to that after headlines.
Yeah.
In international news, the United States has approved a possible $100 million sale of Joe Rogan, no, just kidding, of equipment and services to Taiwan to, quote unquote, sustain, maintain, and improve its Patriot missile defense system. The Pentagon said on Monday, drawing an angry threat of retaliation from Beijing. China, which claims self-governed Taiwan as its own, routinely objects to U.S. arms sales, adding to existing Sino-U.S. tensions. China has imposed sanctions on Lockheed Martin and other U.S. companies in the past for selling weapons to Taiwan, though it is unclear what form the penalties have taken. Alberta and Saskatchewan on Tuesday announced plans to end their vaccination passport system and mask mandates, making them the first provinces to reveal when they would scrap those two coronavirus public health measures that are spurring protests across the country. Mr. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said his indoor masking requirement will be dropped at the end of the month, while Alberta Premier Jason Kenney said he will end the mask mandate for children next Monday. Both premiers said the usefulness of their vaccine passport system has ended and it's time to heal divisions in society over COVID-19 restrictions. In sports news, Lindsay Jacobellis won the gold medal in the women's snowboarding cross event. This marks the first gold medal for Team USA in the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. The redemption for Jacobellis comes after a disappointing loss in 2006, where she celebrated too early and wiped out, giving the gold to Switzerland's Tanja Frieden. Norway leads the games with 10 medals, 4 of them gold, and the U.S. in 10th place with 7 medals. In business news, President Joe Biden publicly acknowledged Tesla for the first time in his presidency on Tuesday. I do remember hearing about this earlier, just like, the amount of times he's referred to the company without actually saying Tesla has been crazy. Like, he's been doing it on purpose. We don't know. He noted the company's status as the nation's largest producer of electric vehicles. Biden's mention of Tesla came during a speech to promote American companies expanding the nation's EV infrastructure. Biden had avoided mentioning the company so far as president, a decision White House aides say is driven by his perception that Tesla is anti-union.
Oh, that's wild.
The mention, well, so are you, Joe Biden. The mention also comes after Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has spent months heavily criticizing, even trolling the president and other elected officials in the Democratic Party on Tuesday. And during press interviews, Musk's comment have ranged from calling Biden a damp sock puppet in human form to accusing the president of being controlled by unions.
That's so ridiculous. Like, that's ridiculous on both points, right? If Biden was controlled by unions, he would have passed the PRO Act. He would have pushed for the PRO Act. He would have been still screaming about the PRO Act. He would have pushed for the $15 an hour. He didn't do any of that stuff. So this notion that, he's controlled by unions. Get out of here.
Well, it's the whole optics, of the other way of him refusing to say Tesla because they're anti-union,
which is just weird too, right?
But it's like I'm still fighting for you. Here's my symbolism. Yeah, I'm not going to say it. So
is that indicative that symbolism actually, on some level, works if Elon Musk is recognizing it?
It does not. All I can say, Biden, say his name.
Right, say his name.
And in holiday news, today is Read in the Bathtub Day and National Toothache Day.
Ooh.
Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Kelly.
National Toothache Day is not
over sexy. Under, how much slack am I going to get from saying say his name, Biden?
Say his name, Biden? What do you mean? Oh, because of the BLM stuff.
Am I going to get called a racist again?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Biden hadn't been saying his name, so it seems pretty apt. should be scared of Tesla. It's funny, Elizabeth Warren, she's been hitting him left and right, though. They've been having this kind of back and forth fight over something or another. I think she's saying he needs to pay his taxes or needs to pay more in taxes. But yeah, say his name. What's the big deal? I mean, you're acting as if he's terrified of the guy. And from the standpoint of Tesla, look, I'm not a big fan of Tesla. There's that, even though I do like the technology that it comes up with. I mean, I love the Neuralink idea, even though I'm not necessarily going to trust hooking that up to somebody's brain. I love the idea of the satellite stuff. I love all that stuff. I think all this stuff is phenomenal. I don't particularly like or not a big fan of Elon Musk. So there's that. But should be scared of saying his name. And this idea that he thinks they're anti-union. There are plenty of companies that may be anti-union. I mean, Amazon is anti-union. So what? Is he afraid to say Bezos? Or is he afraid to say some of these other people's names? It just sounds, no, I don't know. It's just weird.
I would love to push back on Musk because he is our savior. Especially you, a space fanatic, should know that.
Yeah.
But I did want to hit a mere lock and the no-knock warrants.
Yes.
I'm torn on this. I know you're just like, this is a travesty. This is an injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And to this case, I would say yes.
Excellent. Okay.
Well, yeah.
It's that egregious. Like, that has to be pretty egregious, I think, for you to be like, okay, this is pretty bad.
Well, do I think that no-knock warrants are troublesome? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Do I think that they should be eliminated from law enforcement? No. Because how often that you identify yourself as law enforcement, and that means let me run out the back door. Right. Or let me arm myself even more and barricade and get ready to shoot as soon as someone opens. So I get why they are necessary.
I know, but how often does that happen in comparison to the opposite or the contrary, which is
I don't know.
A cop knocks on the door. In fact, because think about it for the moment. This country, how many guns does the United States have? I mean, it's an ungodly number. And you're not basically ramming in somebody's door. And that person has no idea who you are. I mean, think back to the Breonna Taylor thing. He was right to shoot at those cops for coming into the door.
I agree.
He was perfectly correct. And their response to that was basically to kill him because from their standpoint, well, we have the right to defend ourselves, which on some level they do, right? Can you really say, well, the cop doesn't have a right to defend himself? Well, you can't really say that. The issue is you've barged into somebody's house without announcing who you are. I get that there are downsides on some level in both scenarios. But between the two, if I had to come down on one side or on the other about which one is more problematic, I would say cops just barging into somebody's house. I get, look, if you knock, there's a chance that the person can arm themselves. If you don't knock, there's a chance that the person can arm themselves. Which one do you want? At the very least, by announcing yourself as a cop, you have a much better chance of I have a hard time believing that the overwhelming majority of the people, when somebody announces cops, they pull out their gun and go for a gunfight. I just don't buy that. I think you end up in more of a chance for that person pulling out a gun thinking that you're a burglar. Or thinking that you're trying to barge in, especially if you're dealing with somebody who is, let's say, running afoul of the law. Let's postulate that for a moment. This person is running afoul of the law. They're going in, they want to get this particular person. Is that person who's running afoul of the law, they may have drugs in the house, they may have something else in the house, and the cop barges in, what is that person going to think is taking place? Does he think it's another rival drug dealer? Does he think he's being robbed? Meaning that person has no idea who's barging into that place or who's barging into his house.
But I have way less sympathy for that because you're already on the lam.
Yes. Well, no, I get it's not about the sympathy part. For me, it's okay. That's fair. That's fair.
I'm agreeing. And the funny thing is, I don't think the cops are wrong here either. And I don't think Amir is wrong at all.
Yeah.
Because I totally understand being asleep, getting barged into, flashlights in your face, and seeing weapons and saying, I need to defend myself.
Somebody is robbing me or somebody is coming after me.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
And you're going to hear, because they couldn't announce themselves before breaking in, once they ram down the door, you're going to hear them say, like, police, get on the ground. But that yelling while you're dazed waking up.
You're not paying attention to that. It's too,
And at the same time, when he starts firing, the cops have a right to fire back. This is entirely here a breakdown of the law.
But is it a breakdown of the law? I mean, because the law basically allows them to do that, which is why I'm saying it shouldn't allow them to do that in the first place.
Here's what I would like to explore. Because his family says that he legally owned the firearm.
Right.
I would like to see if that's true or if he maybe just told them that. Because I would think that we would have at least some sort of protocol or something to say, hey, we're going to exercise a no-knock warrant on this address. It is home to this person who has a firearm legally because you have to register it.
But even if it's not legal, the person shouldn't forfeit their life.
No.
I mean, I guess my thing is, look, if a cop is breaking into a door, how do I know who that cop is? And if I don't know who he is, am I wrong for trying to defend myself against this unknown threat that's breaking into my door? I think to me, that's where the issue is. And it's like, I get that there's a percentage of people, I don't know what that percentage is, but there's a percentage who hear cops and they're like, I'm going to arm myself up. But I significantly think that is significantly less than the people who would do that when they think somebody's trying to rob them. This case happens too often. I mean,
does it?
The Breonna Taylor thing was pretty significant. And I'm pretty sure with just a little bit of research, this will keep coming up.
Bold claim. We'll see.
Bold claim. It is a bold claim.
Because you don't know and I don't know.
Yeah.
Off the top of our heads.
That's fair.
What I'm saying is I see a difference in if you can prove that if it's a legal firearm and you live at that residence, which is interesting because if you weren't at that residence, if you were at someone else's residence with that legal firearm, but I'm pretty sure you can't have it overnight unless there's some specific reason that you would have it. So therefore, it should be registered to your legal residence. If you're following the law, I would like to believe that it's been written into no-knock warrants that, hey, we're going to serve a no-knock warrant at this address. This address has a registered firearm. Mm-hmm. So we need to go in with, I don't know, a riot shield or something. Maybe not a riot shield because I don't even know if those are like fully bulletproof.
Yeah, right.
Like full body armor shield if we are serving a no-knock, or maybe like, okay, let's knock because we know that there's a firearm.
I know,
and if we serve a no-knock, there is no firearm registered to the house, and we go in and there starts to be gunfire, then we definitely are in the right to shoot back because it's an illegal firearm, or you've obtained it illegally.
Right. What about a situation where somebody's staying over the night? And again, for me, the legality of the firearm or not is irrelevant to me. It's utterly irrelevant. Because the question is...
Was it irrelevant in the Rittenhouse case? Wasn't then.
What do you mean, the illegal firearm?
Yeah.
I still don't
think...
He
illegally possessed it because he was underage and
crossed state lines. But I don't think Rittenhouse should have been killed for it. I mean, my point is...
Right, but it can't matter in one case and not matter at all in the other.
You missed what I'm saying. I'm saying in the context of that person losing their life because the cops basically break in and start shooting, and the individual doesn't necessarily know that those are cops that are coming in, whether that firearm is legal or illegal, I don't think the person should lose their life for it. I think that's kind of where I'm getting at.
If we can help it, I would agree.
Yeah. It's not that the gun doesn't matter in the context of law or something to that effect. I'm saying it doesn't matter in the context of whether the person should make it out alive or not. And whether the cops have shields is almost irrelevant. I mean, down here, right in D.C., where the cops had shields, they had all the time in the world in order to try to get the guy out of the car, and they still end up killing the guy. And so, yeah, I mean, to me, this happens too often. And oftentimes, especially in the Breonna Taylor case, where the person who ends up getting convicted was the guy that missed. Think about that. And the reason they convicted him, they said, well, he put other people at risk because he didn't kill Breonna Taylor. He shot outside somebody else's apartment, which is utterly gross. I mean, look, I get, man, that there are certain consequences for the cop announcing. Maybe the person runs away. Maybe the person flushes the drugs. But between that person running away and between that person flushing the drugs, I would choose that over somebody losing their life unnecessarily for something like this because of some kind of miscommunication where they didn't necessarily understand that there was law enforcement breaking in as opposed to some kind of burglar or robber.
If this is a one-off case, does that still mean completely dissolved no-knock?
Yes.
Is one too many?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say for this instance, and we'll let you go to your soapbox here. For this instance, I could be swayed.
Yeah.
Because...
Is there a no-knock that you would say, okay, that's a fair game, no-knock? Like, what would be the conditions where you say, okay, look, cops have to go in. They shouldn't give a heads up.
Okay, if you have, like, a cartel that's in a drug house and they're trying to, and they're counting money. They've got, if you no-knock, then you can bust in there before they can arm themselves up. If you knock, then they say, oh, well, we're surrounded anyway. Let's go grab our cache of weapons. Not like physical cash, or cache of weapons.
Unless I have a shootout.
Yeah. Lose far more lives, endanger far more people.
I guess my thing is, how often do people have shootouts as opposed to those people turning themselves in? And I would wager to you that it's far less than those people turning themselves in. Like, I don't know how many people want to have a shootout with cops.
I would think that shootouts happen more often from announcing than deaths happen from no-knocks.
Why do you think that?
I mean, the same way that you say that, like,
Well,
I see this as a multiple.
I know, but I'm just asking you, why do you think that? I mean, I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. I'm just asking,
Because why serve a no-knock warrant?
Mm-hmm. Well, they want to get in and try to grab the person.
Right, but you only do that. First off, he wasn't listed on the warrant.
Right.
So why to serve a no-knock warrant is typically for some pretty bad people, some pretty proven records, and some pretty sticky stuff that they've gotten themselves into.
Maybe.
So that's like the normal. So
I don't know. I don't even know if that's the normal. I mean, how many times did they get this stuff wrong? This kid wasn't even on the thing, and this kid ends up dead. Breonna Taylor wasn't on the list. She ends up dead. I mean, like, how many of these no-knock warrants? Meaning, look, I get it, right? If you're seeding a drug den, and you know, it's a flat fact that these guys are a cartel, et cetera, but how many times do they know it's a flat fact? Or how many times do cops convince themselves of something that ends up just not being true? And I'm saying it happens too often. I can't necessarily trust them in and of themselves to make that determination about whether or not this thing is going to take place. And I'm sorry, this happens too often. And so, yes, I'm glad you agree with this case, that this case is egregious. And that's a fair point.
The case is, yes, would I like for him not to be dead? Absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Sanctity of human life, man.
Exactly.
And all that. I could be convinced other way. On what the future of no-knock looks like.
And it'll
Curious
probably
to
be
see
case
it.
by case, right? I mean, it's probably going to be, okay, this case, fair game. The cops did exactly what they were supposed to do. Yes, this person got killed, et cetera.
There's no way you can convict him of this.
Right.
They have
because
to.
they've...
That's
at the
the
point where the law
protocol.
allows it.
That's the protocol.
Yeah. At the point where the law allows it, that's kind of why I'm saying the law shouldn't allow it. I mean, like,
Right.
it's...
That's what I'm saying I could be convinced on.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can't convict the cops at this point. The cops are like, hey, somebody shot at me, I shot back. You allowed us to go into this house with a no-knock warrant. Can't prosecute us for it. Let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Pelly. He gets to see my beautiful face today. We'll be back in a moment with the soapbox segment. Joe Biden is giving crack pipes to crackheads. That's true, actually. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. You guys have heard me say on more than one occasion that I think drugs should be legal. I don't like this notion of putting people in a cage for either smoking a plant or smoking some other kind of item, or for that matter, even injections. As horrible as a scourge some of those drugs are, be it crack, heroin, et cetera, I still don't think that human life should be put into a cage for doing something. Whether you want to call it an addiction, whether you want to call it a medical issue, whatever you want to call it, I don't think people should lose their lives in such a way. Treatment, yes. Trying to find a way to keep those people from this situation in and of itself, yes. Preventing those neighborhoods from degrading in such a way where drugs will become endemic. Again, yes. All of those things, yes. Find ways to secure people, find ways to ensure they have things to eat, find ways to ensure they have a place to stay, find ways to ensure that those people are not impoverished, and you will be able to organically cut down the number of those people who ends up on drugs. And if you end up cutting down the number of people who end up on drugs, you, by definition, end up cutting down the number of people who overdose. That's one way to do it. Deal with the person's real world, tangible problems. And in dealing with those problems, you try to prevent that person from needing to find this kind of escape hatch, this thing that allows them to assuage their reality just for a short period of time before they go back into the dire poverty, or for that matter, the dire conditions that they are basically living in. The Biden administration is looking at this in a different way, however. Instead of trying to deal with this stuff organically, where we're trying to eliminate the poverty, eliminate the drug use, eliminate the conditions that will incentivize people to go in that particular direction, instead, the Biden administration has basically accepted that people are going to be addicts, and in accepting that those people are going to be addicts, to figure we need to have safe injection sites. Now, I am not entirely against one or two of these sites almost as a kind of pilot program to ensure that people don't necessarily kill themselves. However, if the Biden administration is going to make a choice between, let's say, where are we going to spend $30 million of COVID money? Is it going to be on giving crack pipes to crackheads? Or is it going to be to improve the living situations of various people in that particular neighborhood in order to cut down on the rate at which people, let's say, go to crack or heroin or some other kind of drug? I would choose that one. I would choose that one. That's not necessarily what the Biden administration is doing. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is reportedly seeking to give grants to programs to hand out crack pipes to drug addicts as part of a program to keep drug users safe. Now, that sounds something like an oxymoron, right? I'm going to keep this crackhead safe by giving them a crack pipe in order, to make sure that that crack pipe is basically safe. A $30 million Biden administration grant program includes money for nonprofit groups to purchase safe smoking kits, supplies, according to a report in the Washington Free Beacon. The first officially authorized safe injection site opened in New York City in November. The two facilities, which the city calls, quote, overdose prevention centers, provide a monitored place for drug users to partake with staffers and supplies on hand to reverse overdoses. And they even make the point that they were able to intervene in 125 overdoses among 640 users. But think about how weird this is, and think about where they're putting this. They're continually putting this into African-American communities, or basically poor communities. And on top of that, this idea that you are basically, it's drugs against the law or not. And by that, I mean crack, heroin, etc. And why is the federal government okay with basically saying we're going to give crack pipes to poor crackheads in order to keep them safe while doing crack? That doesn't necessarily seem like the best way at all. And I would even go so far, part of me felt this is very paternalistic, this kind of paternalistic racism of sorts. Even though I don't necessarily think this is a racist thing, that was just kind of the feel associated with it. Can we find another way to try to keep people safe? And can we find a way to try to keep people safe that does not involve basically helping them in their particular addiction? Again, I am not ideologically against the injection site in and of itself. I am, however, against the Biden administration deciding that of all the things that it's going to do, of all the things it's going to dedicate its energies to, it's not going to be the $15 an hour. It's not even going to be the legalization of marijuana, which is something that he could do. And if you want to, instead of handing out crack pipes, you could definitely do that. I mean, considering 70% of the country basically uses the product and basically half of the country still can be put in a cage for it. But no, it's not the $15 an hour. It's not ensuring that Social Security gets expanded. It's not ensuring that we have unions. It's not any of that stuff. It's not a public option. Nope, that's not it. Crack pipes to crackheads. Got to keep the crackheads safe. There has to be a better way to do this. And again, I would rather this be focused on in this kind of organic way of cutting down the issue of poverty, cutting down the issue of dire need, or for that matter, the inability to keep a house, or for that house to be in disrepute. I would prefer the president, or for that matter, those states, focus on that. You can cut down the number of people who are basically using these drugs, or cut down the people who are basically in these dire situations if you improve the habitable space that those people are living in. Until you do that, you're basically going to keep perpetuating the issue. And handing out crack pipes to crackheads is not going to do that at all. Austin, what are your thoughts? I know you think this is immoral. I don't necessarily think drug use is immoral, but I do get your point in regards to it's something that's, look, crack is not a good thing.
Put me in a box here, Jamarl. Jeez.
I didn't put you in a box. You said it. It was immoral.
Well, Not
tell me if I'm
drug
wrong. I don't
use
want
in
to-
general.
Okay, explain. My bad. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. The last time we talked about it, you said you thought it was immoral. But
Yeah, I think
maybe
that society, I think that government can be a religious without being amoral. And I think that if you're purposely detrimenting your own body, then maybe the government does have a right to step in and prevent you from doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting. Okay, go ahead, please.
I mean, that's what Australian government's doing with cigarettes.
Yeah.
They're saying that it's bad for you. We're gonna make that decision that you can't have it.
Yeah.
And smokers are all on board with it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this, I mean, I keep seeing it in the chat again and again and again. Do clean crack pipes prevent overdose? It's not like we're talking about needles here. We're talking about a dirty spoon or a clean spoon.
Right. Well, they're talking about the sites also. The injection sites have people there who can basically give the person whatever the drug is in order to bring them back from overdose. So it's the clean crack pipes.
Narcan?
Yeah, Narcan. So it's clean crack pipes, and it's an oversight, I guess, which is weird, right?
I don't like the injection sites at all.
It's very weird.
It's condoning it. It would be different if it was. I would be all for it if they were rehabilitation sites where you could come, you could safely use basically whatever you have, but that would mean kind of talking with someone and working on a plan to get off of it.
Yeah. That would just be real weird, though. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm here for crack. And it's like, okay, well, we need to have a conversation about your crack use as you do crack.
Why is that weird?
How does that work in practice?
Do hard drug users have any desire to get off of it?
Yes, I would imagine some do.
Then that's the first step.
No, I
Admitting
guess what
there's
I'm
a problem.
I guess I don't know how the mechanics of that work. So a person is on crack, and they go because they want to use crack. And when they go to use crack, the person is there. Oh, I see what you mean. You're having somebody there just in case they want to talk and try to get off of it.
No.
That person is there for it. But if the person just wants to use and have a safe space to use, that space is also there. Is that the thought?
No.
Basically, both of those things are existing together.
No.
The person can make. Oh,
No, because if it is a safe site where we encourage the use of hard drugs again and again with no repercussion, with no reintegration, with no reconciliation or whatever plan you want to help in the future, then I'm not for it, because then it's condoning it.
so why did you say you're okay with it if it's both?
I'm okay with it if it's steps to prevent them from doing it in the future.
Right.
Like how CVS, when they decided to stop selling cigarettes, they said, your last pack is free on us. Come in here and get your last pack
Last pack of crack.
of cigarettes. No.
Well, I'm trying to understand. I mean, look, like I said, I'm not ideologically against this notion of, okay, can we have a safe space? I just think it's very weird for the government to do this. And all things being equal in regards to what it could do to try to benefit
We
the
also
public.
talked about this on Political Misfits. You know what it could do? It could set up checkpoints for cops a block away from the injection site to just get people.
It could do that too.
It could set up as soon as you leave and you still have some in your possession,
Somebody waiting on you. Yeah.
go to jail.
Yeah.
It could have a whole bunch of other implications. And then the question becomes, is it going to be like a firearm where if you're traveling with a firearm and you don't have a conceal or an open carry permit, and then you get pulled over, you identify yourself, you identify that you have a firearm to the cop, and he says, what are you doing driving with it? And you say, oh, I'm on my way to the range.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like that scenario where you,
I'm
you
on the way
get
to the crack
found
place. Yeah.
with crack and they'll say, oh, no, I'm on my way to the ejection site.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to follow you for a couple blocks.
See where you're going if you're actually going to the injection site to use crack. I mean, look, it's very weird, right? I mean, if crack is against the law, and then but yet you have this kind of weird carve out where you could be in certain parts of New York and legally use it, it's just a little strange, to put it mildly. Also, there's this question of, do people want that in their community? Meaning, do you really want crackheads coming to your particular community because it's a safe use site? I don't know. I find all this stuff to be strange. And I find it stranger that it's basically being cut on this language of, well, we're doing this for African Americans, or we're doing this for the poor, or we're doing this for something else. And it's like, that's the way you're helping? By providing crack pipes to crackheads? You have no other means. Like, I was reading articles the other day talking about the number of people who were terrified they were going to get kicked out of their homes because of, during the time of COVID, they got behind on their rent. And there's no way for them to basically play catch up because they were already poor. Well, what about those people? Like, between creating a crackhead safe space versus ensuring that those people don't get kicked out of their homes, I would prefer that. Like, for me, it's like I said, I'm not ideologically against it, but I can think of like 20 different things that I choose to invest my money into, especially if I'm taking the money from COVID, as opposed to here's a clean crack pipe and here's a clean place to do crack. Have at it. Your government loves you. Yeah, dude, no, stop. Stop. Don't do that. Like, I mean, man, I don't like the story, and I definitely don't like the way that they're casting this as if this is some kind of racial equity issue. This is not a racial equity issue. I don't need equity with crack in this weird situation, nor do I need the federal government to basically hand out crack pipes.
I'd like to look at what, I guess, the demographics in New York, or what the opinions have been in New York after de Blasio implemented this.
Yes.
Because in his last week, he implemented the first safe injection site in New York City.
Yeah, he had backed it.
As kind of like his grenade toss hoorah on his way out. Biden's just following in his steps. He's like, ooh, I can get that done.
Well, they weren't for it initially. That's the weird part. Initially, Merrick Garland wasn't for this. Merrick Garland would never back this up. And eventually, I guess over the last few days, came out and the Justice Department was signaling that they were open to basically trying it. And it's like, dude, it's almost as if they've acquiesced or accepted, okay, people are going to do crack. As bad as it is, as cancerous as it is to society, as cancerous, as horrible as it is to the community, we accept that people are going to do that. We can't do anything about that. And so we're just going to help them out so they could do it with less harm to themselves. And it's like, so you basically just accepted crack, despite the fact that it's against the law. You've accepted this. Yeah, it's just very strange. It's very, very strange.
What are the pushes for legalizing, and we got to close, but what are the pushes for legalizing marijuana? It's the fact that you can't really overdose on it.
Right. You have to smoke your weight or something.
Yeah. It has all these different health benefits. It would increase taxes, like a whole bunch of good things. Mm-hmm. So then what then is the argument to legalize harder drugs, heroin, cocaine, crack, all that?
As far as I can tell, just not to put people in a cage.
Just that reason? There is no benefit
There's no benefit
having
to crack. No, there's no benefit to crack. Outside of, I mean, the Nazis used to use like heroin or crystal meth in order to fight harder. But short of that, I don't necessarily know what else you're going to use it for. Yeah. Thanks, Biden. Good looking out. Biden, King of Blacks, Joe Biden, helping out black folks by handing crack pipes out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we are still having this conversation about Ukraine. That issue has not necessarily gone anywhere, and there have been all sorts of negotiations that are still going on.
We didn't reach peace yet?
We haven't reached peace yet.
Oh, man.
We haven't had that kumbaya moment where Putin and Zelensky and Biden are walking through the lilies.
And Macron. Don't take him out of here.
I'm not going to take Macron out. He's getting his day in the sun. But Biden, Germany is not on board for this. In fact, there are a few European places that are not on board for it, but Germany is famously not necessarily on board for this. And Scholz, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, was basically called to Washington to get a chin wag in order to get on the same page. And despite him being here, despite Biden's all sorts of, boisterousness, it didn't necessarily seem that Scholz was entirely on board, even though he did kind of give overtures that he was backing Biden on this. To have a conversation about it, we're joined with Peter Oliver. Peter Oliver is our EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. Peter, how's it going this morning? You doing okay?
Very well, guys. Very well indeed. What an interesting discussion you were having before coming to me. I'm a little thrown before that, but before we get on to Olaf Scholz, you talked about Emmanuel Macron. Don't you dare put Manu in the corner. We'll get to him in a minute,
That's what I'm saying.
He is He is front and centre, the go-to man, Johnny on the spot when it comes to diplomacy around Europe. But we'll start off with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor. So he was over in D.C.
Well, that's the catch, and that's the wild part. So Biden was being very boisterous about Nord Stream 2 and everything else, but Scholz didn't seem to be entirely on board for that. I mean, he did seem or give indications that he would back Biden, but it didn't entirely seem like he was going to shut down Nord Stream 2 and all of this other stuff. But tell me if I'm wrong. What's the conversation around it?
Well, you know, it's a strange one because he has said if there is an invasion of Ukraine, Nord Stream 2 is gone, which is exactly what Joe Biden has said. Olaf Scholz has agreed to that. Now, what Olaf Scholz didn't do was mention Nord Stream 2 by name during the press conference that he held with Joe Biden. That has done him no favors whatsoever with the German press. He's been castigated here. He's being called weak. He's being called mousy. He's being called afraid to stand up to the Russians. He's being called the Social Democratic Party, which is Olaf Scholz's party, is being called in thrall to Vladimir Putin. It's a strange one because he is saying exactly the same things. And what you have got is there was a meeting, not just the meeting between Olaf Scholz and Joe Biden. There was also a dinner with Olaf Scholz and Senator Jim Risch, the leading Republican on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That was during this meeting, this visit over to Washington. Now, Jim Risch is the guy who's putting together this massive sanctions package against Russia. And Risch came out afterwards and said, yeah, Scholz is our guy. We basically agree on the American and German position. We're all on the same side. Olaf Scholz essentially is guilty of not being Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
That's what he's guilty of being.
Yeah.
And he isn't... He's guilty of not being Angela Merkel and having not been there forever. And he's also guilty of not being Emmanuel Macron and being very good at getting the spotlight to shine on him.
Well, wait. I mean, would Merkel have gone along with getting rid of Nord Stream 2? I mean, and are they certain that Olaf
Scholz has gone along with this? He has said, I mean, look,
I'm saying with Merkel.
The position that hasn't changed. The position that hasn't changed is Germany doesn't want to get rid of Nord Stream 2. And what we've heard from Olaf Scholz is he said, look, we're willing to put in place far-reaching consequences against Russia. And we've got to remember what he did stress at the press conference in Washington is what you've got to remember is these are consequences that will hurt Germany. Right. Now, what that's understood here is that's a message to the American side is remember, we're prepared to put in place sanctions that will hurt us. We're going to put those in place alongside you, but these aren't sanctions that will hurt you.
Well, couldn't they even just say that means that it's the trade route of grain between them and Russia? Like, there's a bunch of sanctions that they could have without shutting off Nord Stream 2. So by Olaf Scholz not mentioning Nord Stream 2, it's very easy to throw that around that he's not as strong on it.
It's gone too far now. You had Joe Biden directly saying, we will close Nord Stream 2. He was pushed on it. Mr. President, how can you be sure that you're going to close this down? He followed it up saying, we got ways, we will close it down. So it's gone beyond that now. It's all about this pipeline.
I know, but if Scholz believed that, why not just say it? Meaning, if it's very clear, why is he using this kind of coded language? It seems like he's trying to give himself a political out just in case they invade and he doesn't entirely want to do it or he can't do it. But tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, it just seems like if he meant Nord Stream 2, it looks like he would have just said Nord Stream 2.
Yeah, because I don't think he can. At the moment, there isn't a viable alternative here for the energy that's needed here in Germany. There isn't a viable financial offer from the US side to replace the energy that would be needed with the liquefied natural gas coming from the US. There also isn't the terminals built to turn that liquefied natural gas to the regasification process, it's called, to carry that out in northern Germany that would be needed to be built. There is a whole infrastructure system that isn't in place to do that. So he can't write checks with diplomacy or with threats of sanctions that he can't physically carry out. So that's why he hasn't mentioned Nord Stream 2 directly, but it's caused him a lot of problems. And it doesn't help when his foreign minister, of course, isn't particularly on side directly with him. She has made great political capital out of this, and is now looking far more chancellery. I don't know if that is a word. What's the equivalent of presidential for chancellor? Looking more like a chancellor than the chancellor. There we go. Yeah. Because, of course, she took the opportunity to be on the front lines in eastern Ukraine in full combat gear, bulletproof vest, helmet, meeting with the OSCE representatives. And that was the pictures that were all over the German press yesterday with, look at, so, you know, she certainly jumped on the photo op, because ultimately what we did hear was that there was supposed to be a meeting between Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, and President Zelensky in Kiev yesterday, but that was cancelled because there is this unhappiness over Nord Stream 2 and what's seen as an unwillingness from Germany to say outright, we will get rid of Nord Stream 2, and basically hold Nord Stream 2 over Moscow directly. So, even Peter, though, as I said, it is on the table.
Peter, if Scholz came over here and you're saying you are 100% certain that he is ready to shut down Nord Stream 2, even if he didn't mention it by name, he said that he would go in line with the U.S. and it would hurt Germany and there would be severe sanctions and all this. So how can Scholz get away with not saying it, but everyone being sure of what he meant? But Baerbock gets her meeting canceled because Ukraine says that you're not taking a firm enough stance.
Well, I mean, Scholz has mentioned Nord Stream 2 in the past directly by name, and there's many times it's been spoken about that. But also there is the issue about weapons, because Ukraine asked again for ammunition and anti-aircraft missiles from Germany. And Germany again said, absolutely not. We've told you before, we will not be supplying any weapons in this conflict. So it's a double-pronged problem.
Yeah, but they've sent the best darn helmets the Ukrainians have ever seen.
5,000 of them after they asked for 500,000, yeah. Look, it's not going to happen. They've said it wasn't going to happen. And the fact that the Ukrainians keep pushing on it it's not an area that they're going to give on. And they've said they're not going to give on it. The Germans aren't going to budge on that one at all.
And Peter,
it's not a popular move in Germany at all. 3/4 of the German population, the polling at the moment saying, no, we should not be sending weapons to that conflict or to that area in case there is a conflict.
So did Baerbock get a meeting? I know that she still went to Kiev, but I know that Zelensky said that he was refusing the meeting. But did she get a meeting with any lower staff members?
Yeah, no, of course. She met with the foreign minister. She met with Koebler, Dmytro Koebler, the opposite number in Kiev. And she also met with the OSCE representatives on the front lines in the east of Ukraine, where she got a photo op. So, I mean, that's a more standard meeting. What we are looking ahead to at the moment, though, is because we have had quite a lot of things of movement go on when it comes to diplomacy across Europe. There was, of course, Emmanuel Macron's big Eastern European tour, and we've also had Olaf Scholz came straight back from DC back to Berlin to host both Emmanuel Macron and the Polish president Andrzej Duda in a new type of international format. It's not a new type of format, but it's one I'd never heard of before. And I do like it when I get to expand my knowledge on these ones. Every day is a school day and all that. I didn't know that when representatives of the governments of Poland, Germany and France meet, it's called the Weimar Triangle. So there we go. As I say,
Peter,
it'll come in useful at some point.
Before we move over to Macron, I had one last question on this Biden and Scholz meeting.
Yeah.
Afterwards, when they came out of it, and I know that Scholz is being hit hard for not having strong enough language on this, but even though you're sure of what his intentions are, is this a win for Biden? Was it just the U.S. kind of pushing Germany around, and what we saw was Scholz essentially with his tail between his legs of, it's really going to hurt Germany, but I guess I got to go along with it because it's the U.S.? Or is this still seen as a victory for Scholz in Germany?
Depends who you listen to. I can tell you, the Russian side are absolutely going in hard on the Germany's being pushed around. In fact, Maria Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, given an interview to my channel today, to RT, saying the US is essentially occupying Germany. It's not just the tens of thousands of troops that you have got stationed in Germany. It's the I think I've got a quote somewhere written down. Germany, according to a number of characteristics. It's a political. Basically, they're Joe Biden's essentially telling them what to do when it comes to their energy, their politics, their diplomacy. They've even got troops stationed there.
He is.
Yeah, it's not.
It's hard to say she's wrong on that situation.
I mean, look, what she said isn't wrong. It's not going to wash particularly well here in Berlin. I'm sure that's also going to add to the list of things that will go on to the to-do pile, because I think it's the 15th.
Yeah.
That's next Tuesday, is it not? That Olaf Scholz is in Moscow for his meeting with Vladimir Putin.
Wow.
There's quite a few things on that to-do list already. But I think that'll be added to the list of things that will be taken care of then. There is, of course, a meeting here tomorrow between representatives of the German and Russian governments. That's at the Normandy 4 level. That's meetings of the representatives of the French, German, Russian and Ukrainian governments will be here in Berlin. Should be quite interesting meetings there. That's at the political advisor level. But, you know, we always hope that these political advisor level meetings will lead to perhaps a foreign minister meeting and then hopefully a presidential level meeting, because if they get to that presidential level meeting, then we are closer. I know you talked about it at the beginning there, Austin, saying, have we not got peace there yet? Once you get the Normandy 4 talks, for my money, that's where you get a peaceful solution. That's where you get a proper solution to what's going on in Ukraine. And if you can get to presidential level Normandy 4 talks, you'll get some type of long-lasting solution.
Interesting. So Macron, let's go to him for a moment.
Yeah.
Because it's funny.
Yeah,
Angela Merkel left. She stepped down. And there was this question of, okay, who's going to be the leader of Europe going forward? And it seemed that Macron has basically thrown his head into the ring full bore on this very specific front. I mean, how's he viewed? I mean, it doesn't necessarily seem Europe is entirely united on the notion of the Ukraine. And it seems like each European state kind of has their own take on what's taking place. Is France going to be, or is Macron going to be the person to bring all of this together? You know, is he the one who organized Europe in this case, or not so much? You don't necessarily give him high chances for this.
He'd like to be. Mm-hmm. Look, at the moment, Emmanuel Macron is certainly putting in the legwork. He's certainly doing the hard yards, as it were. He was in Moscow on Monday for a 5-6 hour long meeting with Vladimir Putin, in which he came away from that saying that he'd received guarantees from the Russian president. He talked about there wouldn't be any more escalations, as he put it, from the Russian side. He said that there was potential areas where they could move forward with dialogue. He basically came out of that meeting quite confident. Mm-hmm. He was talking to journalists on the plane about potential Finlandization, or essentially neutrality for Ukraine. He did have a meeting with Zelensky just afterwards in Kiev, and I don't know how neutrality or the idea of that goes down in Kiev, because that means no joining NATO at all. Does mean, you know, let's go look at it. Let's look at Finland. Finland is a member of the EU. I mean, that would mean an awful lot of work to do in Ukraine. Ukraine's a long way. I mean, we're talking perhaps even decades away from joining the EU and meeting the standards that would need to be to do that. But, you know, perhaps an option somewhere down the line. But yeah, I mean, look, the thing is Macron has been slammed in some circles back at home in France, that he's doing all of this because he's got an election coming up in a couple of months,
which he's leading.
I think April, which he's you know, he could do with a bit of help, because he's got some stiff competition this time around. And what he's trying to show is that not only is he a president at home, but he's also a statesman abroad. And he's, you know, look, as I said, what he has said, if he can follow through on what he's come away saying he's done, great. He may well be the one that actually achieved something out of this. And, we all have to hope that he does this. He is going to rub some people up the wrong way doing this, because he specifically said while he was here in Berlin last night that he'd looked at, he was aware, I've got remembering the exact quote now, he said he was aware of the efforts that were being made by the United States, and he was aware of the efforts being made by NATO. But he also puts his faith and stall in the Normandy format,
Peter,
as the way forward towards peace. Yes.
So you were talking about how Macron came out of these talks with Putin, and he was so optimistic. He said, "Oh, Putin agreed to this, the Russians agreed to that." But then Putin seemed very upset after this meeting, and he was very visibly frustrated. And he said that he flat out denied that. He said that we never promised Macron anything, that Russia would not stage any further maneuvers anywhere near Ukraine for now or for any time in the future. He's batting way up. He's using this as a political tool. So, I mean, what is it? Yeah. It seems like Macron is trying to be like, oh, well, the U.S. isn't getting anywhere. There's just been random talks of talks. Hasn't been doing much, and Russia's getting really frustrated with that. And also, I'm having an election to come up. So it's my time to shine. I can do something. So it's definitely a PR stunt. But also, why is Putin so upset about Macron taking this lead? Is it that, like, he sees that, okay, well, France, you're not as heavily involved. You're not really the main contender, because if we go to war against NATO, we're barely going to war against France. We're going to war against a lot of the U.S., and the UK is superpower hungry, and Ukraine, which is going to just guerrilla warfare themselves, and we have all these weapons from a bunch of European and Western countries. So I mean... Why? So yeah, if you could speak to any of those.
There is certainly there has to be a moment where you've got to take in what Emmanuel Macron wants to portray himself as, and what Emmanuel Macron was actually able to obtain from these. And I think if you look between what Vladimir Putin had to say about these talks and what Emmanuel Macron had to say about these talks, and somewhere in the middle, you'll probably get what actually was achieved. And because ultimately, the Russian side is having very extensive talks, not only with the French, the Germans, and the Ukrainians at this political advisor level at the Normandy 4. We also have very advanced talks with the Americans at the foreign ministerial level between Sergei Lavrov and Antony Blinken. And you also have newly developed lines of communication between Russia and NATO all over this situation, as well as new reaching outs between from the EU, who just reached out again today about Ukraine to Moscow. So Vladimir Putin can't allow Emmanuel Macron to walk away from this going like, "Don't worry about this, guys. I got it. I've sorted Vladimir out. I'm leading this one," because we don't know if Manu's going to be in charge of France in a couple of months' time.
Mm-hmm. Right, there's that too, right? He certainly, and I think he has to take a little bit of credit. And I think some of the criticism that has gone the way of Emmanuel Macron for actually going out and having these meetings and being the person to go and put himself out there has been a little bit harsh. But of course, there is an ulterior motive that is quite clear for Emmanuel Macron, that he wants to be seen as not only this presidential figure at home, where he has popularity isn't great at all, but that he also represents France on an international stage. And perhaps if he can bolster himself in the polls by being by filling that void that was left by Angela Merkel. And as I said, at the moment, it is looking like quite a void that was left, because I said, while the policies Peter, we're going to have to end this here, but we totally get it. Macron is trying to be a statesman, and we'll see if it works. Peter, thank you very much. Peter Oliver is EU correspondent for RT International, providing daily coverage of political, diplomatic, and economic news from across the European Union. You can follow him on Twitter at PeterG.Oliver_RT and catch us reporting on RT International. This is Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. Back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the right corner, I'm the devotee of DeSantis, your political analyst, Austin Pelly.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. DeSantis.
I had to get it in there, you know? I don't know if I've said it enough. I really want him to run in the next election.
Yeah, you like him. You like DeSantis.
I do like the guy, yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
It's also funny that a lot of Democratic states and cities are taking a huge amount of credit right now for rolling back mask mandates and all that.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, but he did it in the middle of COVID, not necessarily when people
we're
are trying to
still
get
in the middle
over
of COVID. We're technically still at the beginning of COVID.
No, we're not at the beginning.
Really?
Of COVID.
So when's it going to end? If we're in the middle of COVID, then we got another 2 years left?
I have no idea when it's going to end, but I can't necessarily say that we're at the beginning. I mean, how long? It depends on how long you think it's going to last.
I think at least 10 more years.
Why do you think it's what?
Because it's endemic.
Okay, maybe. Who knows? I mean, but is that really the beginning? I mean, when does the beginning start?
If we are within and ready. People aren't going to like this. Well, guess what? I stand by it. If we are in the fourth year of COVID's existence, December 2019 is when it came out. Came to the States in 2020, 2021, and now we're in 2022. That is into the fourth year. I'm not saying that's how long it's been in the States.
You know, that's 3 years, right?
No. We're into the fourth calendar year of COVID-19.
3 years, fourth calendar year.
Well, it's been like less than 3 years of like actual having to contend with it. It came to the States in like late winter 2020.
2020, 2021, 2022. That's 3 years.
Wait, you missed the 2019. You said...
No, I started at 2019.
Yeah, but you didn't put up a finger. It's 2019,
okay,
2020, 2021, 2022.
And we're just starting 2022.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if we're just starting. It also came just at the end of 2019. I'm saying it's in the fourth calendar year of COVID's existence.
But that's what I'm saying. 3 years, fourth calendar year. It's going into the fourth.
Right, but it existed in December of 2019.
Okay.
And we are in February of 2022. So we're even less than 3 years of it actually being an issue. All I'm saying is in the fourth calendar year. Anyway, if we're within the fourth calendar year.
Trying to make it clear to people so they wouldn't keep hitting you on it.
Oh, keep hitting me on it. And I'll stand by it and say it again and again and again. If you don't see that is within the fourth year, the calendar year of COVID, then I go back to school.
It's in the fourth calendar year, yes, but it's been less than 3. But fair enough. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know if this is the beginning. I don't know if this is the end because I don't know how long this is going to last. But I loathe to call it the beginning. And yeah, DeSantis basically took that mask off in the middle. Yeah, there's a difference. Clearly, there's a difference. I mean, it's one thing if you're in the middle of COVID where 5,000 people are dying a day and the person is like, well, we need to get rid of masks and we need to get rid of the mandates and we need to prevent people from getting vaccinations and all this other nonsense. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, on Monday in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 76% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 904,144 men, women, and children in this country. Governor Kathy Hochul will drop New York's stringent indoor mask mandate today, ending a requirement that businesses ask customers for proof of full vaccination or require mask wearing at all times, and marking a turning point in the state's coronavirus response. The decision would eliminate a rule that prompted legal and interpersonal clashes over mask wearing, especially in conservative parts of New York. It was set to expire on Thursday and would have required renewing. Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, and Oregon announced Monday that masks will no longer be required indoors or in schools. California Governor Newsom will let the state's indoor mask mandate end for vaccinated people on February 15th. Don't know how that's going to work. Although school children and the unvaccinated will still need to wear masks. That makes no sense at all. I mean, look, at the point, it's one thing when we first started and we had the vaccinations. And you had the situation where if you were vaccinated, more likely than not, you weren't going to get sick. At the point where you had the variants, especially with the Omicron variant, it's clear that the variant can break through the vaccination. I mean, there may be, even if the argument could be made that the vaccination on some level negligible, prevents it to a certain degree. Well, even if it prevents it to a certain degree, it's still this breakthrough. So it's like this notion of, okay, well, if you have a vaccination, you don't have to wear a mask. What are you talking about? If everybody at this point can be infected, whether you're vaccinated or not, why are you making this distinction as if the vaccination is the thing that is basically preventing people from getting COVID? It's just a weird policy. It doesn't entirely make sense in regards to the Omicron variant that we're confronting now.
Because it's rewarding those who did the good boy and got the vaccine and or got the boosters, and it's punishing those that didn't.
Yeah, but it's optics. I mean, like...
Oh, you surprised?
It's not that I'm surprised by it. I just don't like... I don't know. The policy doesn't entirely make sense.
Sure.
I was going to say, we got to get Kim Iverson to see if she likes this. But at that point, when I read the last part, I was like, okay, well, yeah, she's not going to fly with that. In national news, several families whose loved ones have died or were injured or trying to escape a smoke-filled Bronx apartment building sued the owners on Tuesday, alleging safety violations that led to wrongful death of 17 people, including 8 children. The 5 lawsuits were filed on behalf of the families by Benjamin Crump, a civil rights attorney based in Florida, and the New York firm Whites in Luxembourg. While the fire damaged only a small part of the building, it produced caustic smoke that quickly engulfed the complex. The suffocating smoke rose through a stairwell of the 19-story building and killed people as they attempted to flee. The parents of Amir Locke, a 22-year-old black man killed during a police raid in Minneapolis last week, are calling for an end to no-knock warrants in the city, describing them as a failure of law enforcement. Locke was shot as the SWAT team executed a warrant at an apartment last week. A short video clip of the incident shows police entering the apartment and shouting commands as Locke, who appeared to be sleeping, gets up holding a gun his family said was legally owned. Police then opened fire, quote, "He didn't even see what was coming. He couldn't even see who took his life," unquote. Locke's father said, describing how his son usually slept on his stomach with a cover over his head. Locke was not named in the warrant. In international news, the United States has approved a possible $100 million sale of equipment and services to Taiwan to, quote, sustain, maintain, and improve, unquote, its Patriot missile defense system, the Pentagon said on Monday, drawing an angry threat of retaliation from Beijing. China, which claims self-governed Taiwan as its own, routinely objects to U.S. arms sales, adding to existing Sino-U.S. tensions. China has imposed sanctions on Lockheed Martin and other U.S. companies in the past for selling weapons to Taiwan, though it's unclear what form the penalties have taken. Alberta and Saskatchewan on Tuesday announced plans to end their vaccination passport systems and mask mandates, making them the first provinces to reveal when they would scrap 2 coronavirus public health measures that are spurring protests across the country. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said his indoor masking requirements will be dropped at the end of the month, while Alberta Premier Jason Kenney said he will end the mask mandate for children next Monday. Both premiers said the usefulness of the vaccine passport system has ended and it's time to heal divisions in society over the COVID-19 restrictions. I guess the question is this a win for the convoy? We'll come back to it. Lindsay Jacobellis won the gold medal in the women's snowboard cross event. This marks the first gold medal for Team USA in the 2020 Beijing Winter Olympics. The redemption of Jacobellis, I may be pronouncing that wrong, I hope I'm getting that right, Jacobellis,
yeah.
Okay. Comes after a disappointing loss in 2006, which he celebrated too early and wiped out, giving the gold to Switzerland's Tanja Frieden. Norway leads the games with 10 medals, 4 of them gold, and the United States is in 10th place with 7 medals. Celebrating early, man, that is always bad. President Joe Biden publicly acknowledged Tesla for the first time in his presidency on Tuesday, noting the company's status as the nation's largest producer of electric vehicles. Biden mention of Tesla came during a speech to promote American companies expanding the nation's EV infrastructure. Biden had avoided mentioning the company so far as president, a decision the White House aide says driven by his perception that Tesla is anti-union. The mention also comes after Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has spent months heavily criticizing, even trolling the president and other elected leaders in the Democratic Party on Twitter and during press events. Musk's comments have ranged from calling Biden a, quote, damp sock puppet in human form, unquote, to accusing the president of being, quote, controlled by unions, unquote. Just because you're rich doesn't mean you're bright. Biden is not controlled by unions. In holiday news, National Pizza Day and National Bagel and Lox Day. Interesting. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. I don't know what lox are. What are lox?
Lox is like salmon and cream cheese you put on a bagel.
So it's bagel, salmon, and cream cheese day.
It's very good.
Okay.
I'm just not a big breakfast guy in general.
Same.
But if you saw my eyes perk up when you said National Pizza Day.
He was like, yes, pizza.
Yeah.
So the showboating or the just before you win. I remember this in football where, and I can't even think of the game. I think it was a playoff game. The guy's running, he's running, and he starts to showboat at the last minute. The other guy strips the ball out of his hand, it falls, and et cetera. And then, of course, that guy's going to get fired or something to that effect because it's he didn't get fired. I'm joking. I'm being hyperbolic. But yeah. But not the greatest thing in the world to showboat before you actually get it. So it's good that she was able to redeem herself by getting this medal.
Yeah. What is it? 16 years later.
Yeah.
So she actually, after...
Man, I know she hated herself
after having the gold in the bag, and I've rewatched the video. It's a women's snowboarding cross event.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there's a whole bunch of like the ramp hills and stuff.
Yeah.
But you don't do tricks off of them. You're just getting speed. You're going. You're going through the course.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end, there were literally 2 ramps, and she turns behind, sees her competition's far enough back.
Yeah.
Goes off the ramps and tweaks. So she like throws her board back and like toe grabs it and all that.
Uh-huh.
And when she lands on her heel and spins out. And she immediately gets up but she killed so much speed.
Yeah.
That
the other people just ran by.
Well, she took silver.
Yeah.
Tanha went right by her and took gold.
Oh, that's brutal.
She was upset. And because it was in 2006, she didn't even qualify for the Olympics for the next 3 Olympics that were available.
Wow.
So
she
now
had
this
her
is
chance
like
for the gold. I had to wait 16 years.
Yeah, she's like mid-30s now
before she can make that mistake up. Wow. That's painful. That's painful.
I mean, it's awesome that she finally was able to get it. Because most Olympians don't last 4 Olympics.
Not that long, no. I mean, 16
Only
years
like
is a significant amount of time for a person to keep their physical level up to this kind of Olympic level.
Well, she didn't. She didn't the other years.
Yeah, right. She was wasn't even able to make it. No, man, that's exceptional. Good for her. Funny, but good for her.
She learned her lesson.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So the other case, where is it? Right, not the Tesla thing. It was the other one, vaccine passport. So, do you think that this is basically the Freedom Convoy making inroads? Where, I mean, I've been watching the convoy, and of course, Canada is getting more aggressive in regards to police presence, taking, I think, some of the oil or that thing. They apparently took the money or was able to get some of the pay thing to prevent them from getting the funds that they were using. And of course, Trudeau and the people who are in Ottawa are not happy at all.
Well, Trudeau's not in Ottawa because he's...
he's at COVID at this point. But he's been giving speeches and everything saying this is horrendous. These people this is a siege. That's the way they're describing it, saying that 100 truckers basically in Ottawa basically
because, the freedom of expression and the right to peacefully protest is only afforded when you go with the narrative.
Yes, pretty much. Right.
When you conform. Sure.
I mean, I disagree with the truckers' point of view, but they have every right to protest. And I have zero issue with them basically.
I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death to make sure that you can say it.
Make sure you can say it. This is one of those issues. I mean, they're not burning stuff down. They're not.
No, they're picking up trash and shoveling snow, which, by the way, I believe the police are not letting them pick up trash anymore.
They've stopped letting them pick up trash?
Yes.
Are the cops going to do it for them?
No, they're just...
It's like, hey, buddy, stop. Put that trash down.
I think they probably don't want to give them any credence if they can help it.
You mean like...
Stop
positive publicity or something to that effect.
Because right now they're insurrectionists.
Yeah. That's the way they're trying to call
anti-establishment.
Until they burn down a police station, this notion of these guys being an insurrection is not necessarily taking hold for me. I get that they're occupying the area. I get that they may be annoying. I get that they may be loud.
It's just funny that you said burn down a police station.
Yeah. I mean,
specifically the police.
Very specific, right? Yeah. Well, that's because in my head I was thinking of
because the police
protests.
Because the police are sacred institutions that we need to protect.
No, I was just thinking. No, I was thinking of the BLM protests back in when I think it was Portland, where when it first started, it was like the cop station being burned down, and it was like this just astonishing thing to watch. Be like, oh my God, that's astonishing. No. This doesn't come across as an insurrection. It comes across as a Canadian protest.
Right. And you had asked, does that mean the convoy is getting what they asked for?
Yeah.
As Jack points out, our producer, you have to keep in mind Alberta is like the Texas of Canada. So it probably would have gone that way anyway.
Yeah.
Just a matter of time, even though Canada as a country has been very strict.
Mm-hmm.
So there's naturally going
if I'm not mistaken, Quebec was trying to charge people. They were trying to get penalties for it, getting those people to basically pay back health costs, which again gets into this whole thing of if you're going to have socialized medicine, should you have these provisions where you can basically remove the socialized medicine when you don't like what somebody is doing? And that's problematic in and of itself.
Let's do that then. Let's do in the States. Let's go back to normalcy.
Mm-hmm.
And for every person that an unvaccinated person infects, you charge them $50.
How would you know?
Exactly.
How would you know?
Exactly. Exactly, because you get exposed to way more people on a daily than.
Yeah.
And it's already like transmission is not the issue anymore.
Yeah, the 1 or 2 people. Yeah. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We're coming back with Scotty, Nell, Hughes. We're going to get back on this convoy issue. We're probably going to have a disagreement on that one. And we're going to get into the Biden crack pipe thing. I mean, Scotty, I came across the story from her. And so it'd be great to have a conversation with her about it to get her take on it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us. From mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So we were having this conversation about the Freedom Convoy. We might as well start there. And the question is the Freedom Convoy making inroads? Now, yes, you have Trudeau, who's basically shaking his fist at it every opportunity he gets. Some people are calling it a siege on Canada or on Ottawa. They're saying they're in the way. At this point, you have police officers that are basically taking gas. You've had a situation where their money was basically either confiscated or at very least prevented them from accessing that money. And you have plenty of Canadians who are very upset with these guys. By the same token, they're clearly getting a lot of support in Canada and in the United States. So much so, there's even this question about whether or not that's going to come to the United States. To have a conversation about the convoy, whether it's making inroads, and how long this can basically keep going, we're joined with Scotty, Nell, Hughes. Scotty Nell Hughes is an American journalist, news anchor, and political commentator. She worked for CNN during the 2016 presidential campaign, speaking in support of former President Donald Trump. She joined RT America as a full-time news anchor in September 2018 and is host of the daily news show, News, Views, Hughes. Scotty, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, so for my third appearance, can I consider myself a regular? Can I add that to my list of...
Yes, you can absolutely add yourself to a regular. I mean, one of our favorite new guests. I mean, you've been a phenomenal guest on the show, so you can absolutely. You have a regular card from here on out.
Well, next week when you read off my bio, I'm going to assure you that that's going to be the final because, I mean, you got to do the best last is kind of my theory. It's a hobby kind of way of looking at it.
Very cool. I'll put regular. I'm writing it down now. Regular Scotty Hughes.
Add to the speed dial.
Yeah, and add it to the speed dial. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the convoy, is it time for these people to basically pack their stuff up and leave? Is mission accomplished? Or are these guys going to keep going? And how long can they basically keep this up?
Well, I think they're going to keep it up. Trust me, anybody that's ever gone to a truck stop and gone into one of those restrooms, you know these guys can live through anything. Prime Minister.
Well, it seems that they're living through it. I mean, they're getting a lot of flack, though. I mean, the majority of Canadians, for the most part, are vaccinated. And I think the majority of Canadians basically, on some level, agree with the vaccination thing. But clearly, just like in the United States, you have a strong minority that is against a lot of that stuff and a lot of those policies and everything else. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think they're going to be able to make inroads in trying to get something of what they want? I mean, at this point, they're basically trying to go after the government itself. Initially, it was just the vaccine requirements. Now it seems to be they want Trudeau to be deposed. What are your thoughts on this? Are they going to be able to get any kind of, I don't know, any of what they want? And what is the least they can accept before they basically pack up and leave?
Okay, let me point out, this is all happening because the government refused to meet with the people. They refused to meet with one of their contingencies that they did not like, one of the contingencies that they did not agree with. This could have been completely absolved 2-3 weeks ago, even a year ago, when the initial people who were organizing, the organizers of this, the Truckers Association, if Trudeau's government would have just said, you know what, let us meet with you, let us hear you. But just like any time a people becomes frustrated at their government ignoring them, refusing to acknowledge them, it builds. And what we have seen is 2 years of this building. And here's what I don't think people realize. You're right, 90% of those truckers are vaccinated. But it's not about those truckers. With this 10-day waiting period that Trudeau put on those truckers, it was actually going to already hurt the economy. It was already hurting because those truckers, you were just making people that were within Canada be able to go back and forth. What you were doing is you were still putting a huge block on goods and putting more of a demand on the truckers that already were in Canada. So this was not going to be able to hold out long term just due to the fact that it was already hurting the economy. The economy was already at a crunch and getting even worse because they were not able to handle the job that was being put on them.
I know, but
this is literally about making your working environment better.
But certainly this is worse for the economy. I mean, even if that waiting day was there before, well, these truckers are not functioning or working now. They're basically just parking their trucks and having their trucks sitting in the middle of Ottawa. That certainly is not an economic boon. If anything, that's going to be a severe economic hit, especially for Ottawa, right?
For 2 weeks, considering the 2 years of economic lockdown. Make no mistake, the only reason why Canada's in this position economically is because of the movements, the mandates, and the lockdowns imposed by Trudeau's government. That's what stopped commerce for 2 years. And after 2 years, when your government's not listening to you and everybody's saying, open up, we need to get our economy moving, and they're still refusing to do it, you might have to do something dramatic, which is what we're seeing happening in the streets right now. And I want to applaud you, like I applaud mostly talk radio at this point, for covering this. I am appalled, even at the mainstream supposed conservative networks. They're not covering it. This right here is the reason. And once again, you talked about Black Lives Matter. You talked about all of these other different social justice movements that have been given lots of coverage by different groups. This needs to be given coverage too. The right or the wrong, we need to be having public discussions about it. And we're having it here in the United States when you're seeing states like all of New England now saying, guess what, we don't need the mask mandate. Mm-hmm. Illinois, you're seeing these mask mandates being lifted, and not because the numbers are any better, because they're not, but because people are seeing the fallacy to what has happened and how damaging this is to our economy, how damaging this is to society, and they're tired of it. And they really, and literally, Democratic governors and mayors across the country are saying if we do not do something, even our own base is starting to turn on us, except for the extreme, crazy leftos, progressive. Everybody else is saying we're in trouble. 2 years of this is too much.
Scotty, do you think that American media has given this Freedom Convoy less coverage, or at the very least, unfair coverage based off of how they're portraying these people because they're afraid of what it could mean for the U.S. Because there are high talks of the convoy coming here, maybe not the Canadian truckers, but from a convoy from L.A. to D.C., and that with the amount of, I guess, viral pushback we have against our vaccines here, I think could be way larger. And at the very least, even if they cover the convoy and they paint them as horrible, violent protesters, then if it comes to D.C., they can do the exact same language and shut it down as fast as possible with a quick act and just start handing out, like, let's January 6th it again. Let's start handing out imprisonments with pretrial.
Which is what my worry is about this truckers convoy, because we've seen what happened with the January 6th. But you're correct on this one, because here's the thing. 99% of the media, including, once again, these conservative outlets, have been pushing this 2-year ideology that we're now finding out to be extremely false regarding COVID, the death count, the vaccines, things that we've been discussing. At least we've discussed what's true, what's not, and we've had an open forum, probably on your show, like I've had the freedom to do on my show. These networks have fallen hook, line, and sinker mainly because even at the beginning when people were like, well, let's try ivermectin, you've seen this pressure put on them, this cancel culture. I am looking at multiple good news anchors, news personalities that lost their jobs because how dare they say try this alternative therapy like ivermectin and vitamin D? How dare they say that? And they lost their jobs because of it. They haven't gotten an apology yet. So that, you're right, the mainstream media is extremely afraid because, once again, it's a show of force that who the majority is. We keep talking the silent majority that was there in 2016. It will show the majority. Only this time they're even more scared because it's not falling along political lines. You cannot define this like you could Trump versus Hillary Clinton. This is something mixed. There are just as many angry small business Democrat owners that are going, this is enough. There's just as many angry parents. You look at Loudoun County, what's happening in Virginia right now. That is not just Republican parents there showing up the school board saying, take these masks off our school like the governor wants. And that's what the mainstream media is. They're going to be exposed for being either A, pushing an agenda, or B, complying and falling complacent with an agenda that hurt our economy, hurt our society, and they don't want the people to realize that they're not the only ones that think that I realize something is not right about how this has been handled the last 2 years.
I mean, it's a pandemic. I mean, you have all of these people that have basically dropped dead. I mean, 900,000 over the course of, 2 years? I mean, I'll also keep saying the fourth calendar year, but basically 2.5, 3 years. And so it's like, certainly something has to be done. I mean, meaning you're never going to have a situation where that many people are getting sick, that many people are dying. You have something that's that transmissible, that's taking that much loss of life, and the government is just going to look at it and say, okay, we're not going to do anything about it. Of course, they're going to try the vaccinations, or of course, they're going to try masks in order to keep down the number of people that are getting sick. I mean, for example, hospitalizations. If you're looking at the number of hospitalizations, what do you have? Surgeries, you have elective conditions that people need to come in. Sometimes they need to get x-rays, they need to get all that stuff. And because of the number of people that were basically getting sick and filling those hospitals, well, many of those things basically fell to the wayside. I guess my point is, of course, the government was going to do something in this situation. They were never just going to stand by and allow a million people to basically drop dead without doing anything to try to stem the number. What are your thoughts?
Well, here's the thing, and I get that 900,000 number. I saw the count at the bottom of CNN all the time because it was the death toll was raising the hospitalizations. But now we're finding out, and even Fauci himself and every other person who's going on TV said, well, those people came into the hospital not because of COVID, but because of something else and was diagnosed with COVID. I mean, think in your own circles right now. How many people are testing positive without a symptom? Because they take one of these take-home at-home from China tests, and magically they're positive. We're finding out that 900,000 number is not people that died. And how many of those actual deaths, the people who legitimately died because COVID was introduced into their system, was initially because of bad governing, like what we saw to Governor Cuomo, that took a sick person and put them in a very volatile area like a nursing home, and it spread like wild.
I mean, that is New York.
Finding out the story.
1,000% agree with you. Cuomo was horrendous. He killed many grandmas in New York. But that's Cuomo. And that doesn't, I mean, that's not necessarily indicative of every other state. That was something that Cuomo did that was just utterly horrendous. I mean, I guess my thing to you is the government has to do something at the point where a large number of people are basically getting sick and dying. And I would put to you that the reason that things are changing, meaning in many of the other states, even in these some kind of lefty states, has to do with people just getting tired of it. Meaning it's like, how long can you basically go on this notion of COVID? I mean, we're, 3 years in at this point, 4 years, calendar year. Thank you. Thank you, Austin. How long can you go with that? I mean, I think people are just getting fatigued, and that fatigue is expressing itself in saying, okay, we have to live with this, as opposed to just kind of continuing to kind of push the envelope. I mean, you don't think that that's the changeover. Not so much that they were just wrong in what they were doing, but more so they've just come to a different analysis of it in the sense of, okay, now we just have to live with this.
Well, it's just lucky that, granted, we're in a midterm election year, but you cannot look at the timing and how other countries handled this, that we're not in the middle of a major election, like a presidential election, versus how a country like the United States handled it and took a health issue that I agree, there was something introduced into our society that was making people sick. But somehow the United States, being the leader of the free world, has more deaths, has more cases than any other country, including the country of origin. You have to understand something's not right. And we were one of the only countries that were actually incentivizing hospitals to declare people dead. I mean, George Floyd was declared dead because of COVID. $17,500 went to the hospital that wrote on the death certificate, George Floyd, COVID death. Now tell me, did George Floyd die of COVID? Because that's how the government recorded him.
Oh, you asking me? No. George Floyd died because a knee was on his throat. He didn't die because of COVID.
Exactly. But yet, that's right there where those numbers, I think, is continuing throughout. So we're going to figure out how companies, and do you know the number one company who actually saw the greatest gain in the last 2 years? I know this is not going to come as a surprise to me. What are we seeing? I think it's like something like, and I want to get my numbers right, but it's definitely in the billions, several $100 billion. Oh, guess who it would be? It would be our pharmaceuticals, and it would be Pfizer. They saw the greatest gain. They became a COVID company. When right now you had Trump, who was talking about a knee on the throat of Big Pharma and making them having to reduce their prices on their pharmaceuticals. They were suffering a horrendous loss, and I say that they still had all their mansions. And then magically this comes around, and now all of a sudden there is ways to treat COVID. Then you have prevent COVID. Then you have to boost COVID, and by golly, you need to boost it again. This has all been, yes, something was introduced that made people sick, but the measures that actually would have saved lives were never put in place. That was not the goal.
I do wish Trump would have done better at dealing with the COVID thing, as opposed to kind of prioritizing the economy as opposed to people's lives. I agree with you on that.
Exactly, but the ones when he said push and when he said shut down the country, and like I said, this all goes into this freedom convoy. And people after 2 years are saying, enough is enough. We need to stand up for our freedom and our ability to do our family. And here in the United States, they don't want that resurgence. Because once again, like I said, this is not political. You cannot identify this right now as Republican, Democrat. I'm just as angry at Trump for the way he handled it. In fact, I think this is the main reason why he was not reelected, was because of what he did. And now you're seeing Biden is suffering the same. Hence why my prediction, I'm going to make it on your show before I make it on my show. I do believe on March 1st, when President Biden does do his State of the Union, he has got to have a victory right now after so many losses that he will say, I am right now putting in plans in place to lift the federal mask mandate.
All right, I'm writing that. I'm writing that down. I'm writing that down.
I mean, the other victory that he could latch onto, of course, is these openings of safe injection sites. But I did want to hit one last question on this convoy before we switch topics. The question of children, and they've come up, and I believe it's about 25% of these truckers have kids with them, or kids that are living in the trucks with them. So now Canada's equivalent of CPS, if I can look at the Children's Aid Society, CAS, is looking into, and the police are asking CAS to step in, or at least recommendations on what they should do.
They want them to take the kids?
That is the question. As of right now, they're not taking the kids, but they're beginning to argue on if the kids are living safely with their parents. Is this parental abuse? Could it lead to other issues?
What's the difference between this and camping?
The -6 degrees.
I know, but as long as the kid is warm, I guess.
Right, but at the same time, what if they're taking the fuel away, and these cars are, and these trucks are having, and cars are having to sit for 2, 3, 4 hours without turning on, just bundled up, because they don't have fuel. Well, if the government took away the fuel, is it the government's fault that now you're putting these kids in this situation? Is it the parents' fault for bringing the kids with them to this protest? I'm curious. And then also, we had Melinda in the chat sent us a video, and I had Jack watch it because I can't do that on air. Apparently, they were interviewing with someone from the welfare, the Child Protective Services of Canada, and she was basically saying that it's unethical of how they're being asked to cover the welfare of their children while the children are still very happy. They're not mistreated, as we've had our Canadian journalists on. They're playing with each other in the streets. She lost her job because she's been slandered by CNBC. The young kids are very unhappy with masks and restrictions that are being pushed on them and all that, and that's what they come out with. But before we move on to the safe injection sites, my question to you, Scotty, is do you see this evolving into a, well, let's do it for the kids, we have to break up this protest for the kids scenario?
It would be a shame if that's what they use, because that's what they've used all along when it comes to masking the kids in schools, injecting kids with even more vaccinations under the age of 5. Everything has been used for the children. But here's one, if one bit of real violence breaks out, and here's the best part on this. I think the police in Canada are a lot like law enforcement here in the United States. They're just doing their job, and they want to keep their job. They want to put food on their family's table. They don't believe, they're just following orders, following commands, and they want to put food on their family, just like these truckers want to provide food for their family. So I would think at some point you do have if there is a clash, that does not bode well for these truckers, just like January 6th did not bode well for those that were the thousands that were here for freedom and peaceful gathering.
That was not a peaceful gathering.
Clash can show everything. Well, there was 100,000 here that was here for a peaceful gathering.
There were plenty that were here for a peaceful gathering, but those people were out there fighting cops and whatnot. Not all of them. Agreed. Not all of them. Not all of them. Not all of them. You said something that I'm not going to call it profound, but it was fascinating. You made this point that you were bothered by basically Trump shutting down the economy also. And I was wondering, from the standpoint of the election, Donald Trump is considering running again. And him and DeSantis have been basically popping off at each other. Well, a little back and forth, not necessarily too heavy. It seems that Popova doesn't necessarily like any of his acolytes to run against him and challenge him on this front. And it doesn't necessarily seem like DeSantis doesn't want to take need to show fealty in the way that Donald Trump wants. And so if you're concerned or if you're bothered by what Trump did, do you think that's enough to keep him out of the running? Meaning, if Trump runs again, is he going to basically be attacked for the policies he put into place during COVID? Even though I don't think they went far enough, the Republicans, many of them, think they went too far. And in the way that you're saying it, and even DeSantis, for the most part, who basically hit Trump on basically his COVID policies. So is that going to be something that's going to be made an issue out of if Trump tries to run again for 2024?
Here's the issue people have to wonder regarding Trump in 2024. All Trump needs is himself, one other person telling him, hey, you should run for president, because that's all who basically told him he should run for president and believed in him back in 2016. That's all it took. And you saw what he accomplished with that. So now what you have is Trump surrounding himself with some of those same people that they're not telling him he needs to run for president because it's what's best for the country. They're doing it because it's what's best for their new Mercedes. Mm-hmm. And that's the dangerous part in all of this, is it's these people that around him are wanting him to run again because this is how they make their money. They've become literally professional fundraisers off of the Trump name and what the idea that Trump sells. Does that mean that it would be very easy to launch a campaign against him based on the policies, which he did not. No one had an idea of what he was going to do in 2016. That was a luxury. Everything they came up with, but people still had faith that he was going to do what, he was going to side with freedom. He was going to side with the people rather than the bureaucracy. He didn't, especially in the case of COVID. Let's remember he didn't necessarily put Fauci in power, but he put Fauci as a household name for this generation. Those sorts of things right there, if you are a conservative Republican running against him, you could do. The problem is people still have hope, especially his base. And if he would have run the country like DeSantis ran Florida, we would have been in a whole different picture and he would have been reelected. But unfortunately, he was being given some very bad advice on this. He chose to follow it time and time again, despite people like DeSantis, others that were around watching it, trying to give them advice saying, this is not how you're handling this wrong, which was exactly what the Democrats needed in order to make sure he did not get reelected. And people go, we can see why. So I don't think DeSantis is going to run against, I still say this, I don't think he's going to run against him unless there is more and more evidence that comes out that shows that there's just no way that he's going to be able to bypass some of the records that were able to come against him.
I know Jamarl wants to jump on that, but we did really want to hit these safe injection sites or shooting galleries with you, as it's been touted by various sources. And for me, where it starts is this isn't just Biden saying, okay, let's do that. Here's my pen. Let's sign this check. Mm-hmm. He's taking COVID funds to do it. So,
30 million.
Yeah, 30 million of that for crack pipes, clean crack pipes. So, I guess how many deaths are associated with some dirty crack pipes? It's my first question.
Well, but also my other concern, and this is all under racial equity. Can you explain to me?
That's the part.
How this is not insulting. How this is not insulting not only to the LGBTQ community, but to the African American community, to the homeless community. How is this not insulting to them?
It is. I mean, and that was kind of my monologue this morning, pushing back on this notion that this is some kind of weird racial equity issue, or he's putting it under this kind of guise of racial equity. And you're basically, look, like I said, I am not ideologically against having safe sites to some degree. But to take $30 million of COVID money, and of all the issues that avail the country, to say, this is what we're going to invest our money on, this is what we're going to focus on, and this is what we're going to put this much money on. And then to use the language of, we're going to give crack pipes to crackheads in order to keep them safe for reasons of racial equity. Are you insane?
Well, it's like Biden saying out, like, listen, a poor person should have just as much opportunity as a white person.
Yeah.
That's in his mind, he just equates being black or being a minority with being poor, with being a drug addict. And that's fine for him to say on the presidential stage.
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to that either. What are your thoughts with this? I mean, is he going to get flack for this? I mean, I know he's getting flack from the right on this, but shouldn't he get a little bit of flack from the left on this also? I mean, I called it paternalistic racism in a weird way. You're basically putting crack places in minority neighborhoods under this guise that, okay, we're going to have these safe sites. And, you know, in a case, and I remember reading the report, they kind of made this point that they were able to save 125 overdoses of 640 users. But again, what we're talking about here is the state-sanctioned crack use, right? I mean, what am I missing here?
Well, as my connotation, it's like putting someone who's fighting obesity, morbid obesity, instead of, you're going to take them out of the candy aisle at Walmart and put them in the candy aisle of Whole Foods.
Right. With a monitor to make sure they don't overdose.
With surgeons and doctors ready to go.
Yeah.
But I mean, with crack thing, is it only for repeat users, or is this in these neighborhoods opening the door to say, hey, this is a safer, it's a safer usage now?
Is that?
You're also giving, as someone also put in the comments, you're giving drug dealers permanent customers.
That's another point.
Repeating customers. And here's the thing. What else would you expect from a man who seems like his chief advisor is Corn Pop, and he was never checked on the campaign trail for his very racist comments when he made that whole story about Corn Pop was a bad dude.
Yeah.
No one ever called him out on that. So what else would you expect from this man? But this is blatant racism. This is blatant homophobia. This is take apart the drug use out. If he said this about any group in a negative way, if he said this about overweight, if he said this about people who are smoking, and you know what, we want you to quit smoking, so we're going to, instead of you buying the cheap cigarettes, we're going to give you the most expensive Marlboros so that you don't put the bad tobacco in your lungs. Whatever he used in this, the fact that he is calling out a specific group for a negative behavior and encouraging it, even by giving them higher price but still negative items, this is blatant. This is what is wrong with our country today. And as much as the Republicans calling them out, the silence from the left, from everywhere, where is the African American caucus on the Hill? Why aren't they calling him out on this? Why isn't his own cabinet, who he's championed diversity on, If there's anything that someone should be standing up in front of a microphone with a camera and saying, this is wrong, because guess what? It's going to continue to get worse from here, because leaving racism, leaving homophobia unchecked, it only gets worse.
I mean, but it's almost, this is very weird to me, because Joe Biden spent most of his career putting people in prison. I mean, I remember the video where he's attacking Ronald Reagan for not executing the people. You know, he's like, we gave you the power to execute people, and the president wasn't willing to use it. I mean, so Biden spent like the last 40-something years that he's been in Congress putting people in jail. And so, like, to become president and to do a 180 and basically flip and not just, you know, we're not going to put people in jail. We're going to make sure that they're safe in doing it. And I also kind of push this notion that between, okay, we're going to have safe injection sites because we want to preserve life, versus we need to make those communities better, or make those communities safer, or make those communities, you know, keep people in their homes, and keep people, make sure they don't go without food, or go without the ability to get from point A to point B, or go into lack. It seems like that would be the area that you'd focus on in order to cut down on this notion of drug use. Not, we're going to make, you know, safer crackheads.
I'd like to hit this from a new angle. $30 million of COVID funds, right?
Right.
So does that mean that, and crack pipes are considered drug paraphernalia.
Right.
Drug paraphernalia is illegal.
Yes.
In most cases, to possess, federally, to try to sell it, to try to mail it, import it, or export it. So does that mean that, let's say, glass blowers
or something,
glass blowers that are doing this illegally, then, because it is their intention to sell it?
Yeah.
Does that mean they get federal grants to stock where these clean crack pipes are coming from? Are we going to have federal representatives go in and say, like, hey, where's your dealer? I need to talk to him and see where he gets his pipes from. How's that going to logistically work?
Oh, you just opened up a whole new lobbying corps right there. Already I see the crack pipe lobbyists starting up on the Hill right now, trying to advocate for, you know, more funding for them. That's, you know, that right there is an interesting angle on it, but it's true. You know, where does this stop? But, you know, as you were speaking, you just reminded me of something. This is actually, everybody needs a villain. I mean, I hate to bring in the current situation. Everybody's got to have a villain, and the best one is the one that doesn't fight back. Right now with Russia and Ukraine, you know, Russia doesn't have to fight back. They're not fighting back the American narrative. The truth is coming out what that situation is. But yet, by this administration continues, and Republicans continue to heap on. They got to have a villain. Russia makes a great villain. You know who else makes a great villain here at home? Drug users, the people, the homeless people in the street, crackheads. So guess what? If you keep them on the streets, if you keep your villain alive, which is what this is basically doing, then guess what? There's a reason for those candidates, those in elected office, to stay in power, to go after the villain. That behind the scenes, they're the ones that are actually enabling.
Yeah, I've heard that argument before, that you can't have a war on drugs if you've locked up the drugs or made them so hard to come by. You can, though, if you're enabling it to continue.
But see, I don't think that's. I mean, look, I understand their point, what they're trying to go for. I just don't necessarily like what this looks like. Meaning, they're trying to basically cut down on the number of people who end up dying, or the number of people who end up getting sick. That's their goal. That's their objective. And so I take them at that. I just don't necessarily like the means by which they're going by it. I don't necessarily add a nefarious tint to it, though, that they're basically trying to preserve or to create more drug users. Is that what you're trying to say? That's what you think they're trying to do, create more drug users in order to, for what? To give them some kind of political bump? What's your thoughts?
How can you not say that when you look at it? If you want to stop drugs, it's not about giving them clean crack pipes. It's about doing what we were doing probably about 20 years ago, when you were going after these meth houses. When you were allowing the DEA to actually shut down these drug dealers, when we were actually securing the border, where the bulk of our drugs actually come from that are used in our cellars, when you were actually, instead of letting when you were letting the actual dealers out of jail, you were actually keeping them in jail. You were cutting off their supply chain. That's how you stop. If you literally want to stop the drug use, you also demonize it. Give Nancy Reagan this. Say no to drugs, that red campaign that we all grew up on.
But none of that stuff worked. None of that worked.
It did.
How did it work? Drugs were all over the place. I mean, it was none of that stuff slow down drug use, not to mention the potential for the CIA to be bringing that stuff into the country in and of itself. I guess my point is none of those things actually stopped drug use. Yes, they put people in prison. Yes, they allowed a disparity between African Americans versus, this crack cocaine disparity and everything else that Bill Clinton knew was there, that Joe Biden knew was there, and still pushed that legislation through. But that stuff didn't necessarily stem drugs.
It wasn't a household, and our governments weren't made. Now we've gone from that, and if you want to say that it didn't take it away, at the same time, now we have a government that is making drugs legal, and I'm sorry, I'm one of those that have a real issue. We could have a conversation about people's choice when it comes to marijuana, but now you have states actually advocating and making money off of it. We've gone from a huge flip-flop from the 80s of Nancy Reagan's just say no, where kids grew up, being told don't do drugs, to now, hey, let's start an education program with marijuana sales, like what we're seeing. And then we scratch our heads and wonder why we have things like that are happening in Denver, Colorado, and the homeless issue. And we have issues in Seattle because of situations like this.
I prefer to call it fighting COVID. That's what I prefer to call it. Fighting COVID. The marijuana, deal with COVID. Wonk, wonk. Scotty, thank you for this. I appreciate you joining us. We always enjoy these conversations. Our regular guest, Scotty Nell Hughes. She's an American journalist, news anchor, political commentator. She worked with CNN during the 2016 presidential election, often speaking in support of President Donald Trump. She joined RT as a full-time anchor on September 2018 and is host of her daily show, News, Views, Hughes. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be taking your phone calls. The number is 202-521-1320. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. What's up?
It's not 9 o'clock yet.
Not 9 o'clock?
It is not. Huh. We are taking your calls.
Guess I am tired.
The number is 202-521-1320. We are taking your phone calls. We have Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, what's going on, my man? Doing okay?
How y'all doing, gentlemen? I got 3 comments. I'm going to try to make it through them. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Downinger, and hashtag no more. My first comment is dealing with the truck protests in Canada. The trucks is not being moved right now because you have the tow truck services. Heavy lift tow truck services is declining to remove the trucks in Iowa, and they're finding out in other cities when they got tow truck cities, they decline and move the trucks. So it's solidarity with the people on the tow truck side too.
Wait, say that again. You said the tow trucks are not moving.
The tow trucks in Ottawa have already refused to
move the other trucks.
And so the government is looking outside of Ottawa to bring other tow trucks in. And you're saying out of solidarity, those tow companies are saying no as well?
Exactly.
Very interesting. Wow.
As well. So, my second comment is dealing with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Mm-hmm. German Chancellor have yet to come out and say that they will cut off the gas, which is not flowing yet.
Right.
They didn't say it because if they do say it, then something might happen in Ukraine where a false flag might go ahead and try to suck Europe and Russia in. So they don't want to say it. Then Zelensky would know that he would have is basically they might as well create the false flag. It's just speculation right now. That's why they didn't say. That's why the German chancellor didn't say anything about canceling it. I
think that German chancellor doesn't want to be locked into a particular position. And as long as he doesn't say it specifically and overtly, he has some room and wiggle room to basically dance around after the fact.
I mean, yeah, if he says, we're going to shut down Nord Stream 2, then immediately I would say maybe 20% at least of his country goes, well, buy some winter coats.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be cold.
Yeah, we're going to freeze to death. I mean, they know that it is in their interest for that gas to be flowing through Nord Stream 2. They know that. And so regardless of what the United States wants on this is basically hurting him and his country.
Yeah,
and so, I have a hard time believing he's going to, meaning it is not in his interest to say that and to get stuck in a particular political position in case the worst happens.
Yeah, and Sharif, if you're interested in it, I would recommend looking into Japan. Apparently has come out and said that, well, now we're going to provide some gas to Europe because it would ease tensions over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Don't see that they could do nearly enough, but it's still very
Japan
early.
is going to do that. Yeah.
Sharif, any last comments?
Yeah, well, I got one more comment, but I'd like to say once the gas starts flowing, like in August of this year, the U.S. will lose leverage over the Germany once that gas starts flowing because the pipeline is not really completed yet. It's still working out bugs with it. My last comment is dealing with the attack on Joe Rogan is organized. Come to find out, the group, the Patriot Takes, that was constantly retweeting that clip that been out for 4 or 5 years of him saying the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they are partnered with this group called Medias, MEIDAS Touch.
Midas Touch?
Which is on,
Midas Touch?
No,
Medias Touch.
Yeah, so
Midas.
So they partnered with them and come to find out Midas Touch is connected to they're a Democratic super PAC, all this group that's run by 3 brothers that have connections to the Hollywood and also connections to the NFL. And these 3 brothers is and they're basically what they're bragging about the clout, this and that and the other, how Jimmy Dore explaining that they're bragging about it because they are the ones trying to take down Joe Rogan, and who can take down Joe Rogan will be put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
It's starting to backfire against these media tusts because people standing up against that and saying it was taken out of context.
Mm-hmm.
But basically they are a Democratic super PAC, and it is an organized thing to basically take Joe Rogan out of the 22 and 24 election cycle because this was about is to destroy his whole thing. It's not about the Pfizer.
Tarif, I hear you, man, but we got other callers I want to get to. We got Jamar coming in from Connecticut. How you doing, Jamar?
Hey, first of all, I want to thank you guys for taking my call. Thank you so much for being independent. Well, I don't know if you guys are independent, but being a great station that's talking about the truth. Jamarl Thompson, thank you so much for your shows and everything. I want to say first because you inspired me to also do podcasting and talk about political things.
Very cool, man. Thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to just make a comment or a question about what Biden is doing with crack pipes. Since I am a black man, and of course I had family that had to deal with that in the past. Is he saying anything? I think it's okay that he's doing a safe place for them.
Mm-hmm.
But is there anything else that he can do, that he should do, to help out the community? Because that doesn't just solve anything. Not everybody smokes crack anymore. It's just a few people at this point. And there's a lot in the black community that he promised to help. He even said that if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. So
yeah. I mean, look, that's a great point, right? I mean, if you think of like 20 issues, where does this fall? And this is not going to be the top of the line.
What would be top on your list? If you had 30 million, real quick, what would you put it in?
Oh man, $30 million. I'm not quite sure. Maybe to make sure people stay in their homes.
I would say affordable housing.
Yeah,
I'm all for affordable housing.
Yeah,
I think it solves a lot of issues,
especially with the people who are complaining now because of the COVID thing and the rents and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I would put it there before I put it to clean crack pipes. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Pelly. We're coming back. Mm-hmm. Spaghetti Man is going to give his speech in the beginning. Fault Lines. Thomas Pelly. Back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we are back live from the divided states of America, fixated betwixt the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Good show so far.
Yes.
Had some really vigorous segments.
Oh, yeah.
In the best way possible.
Yes.
And we still got another 60 minutes for you, so stick around. Starting off with our headlines. In COVID news on Monday in the United States, there were 253,782 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,598 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 253,800 cases per day, a decrease of 62% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 76% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 76,767,122 people across the US of A and killed 904,144 people. Governor Kathy Hochul will drop New York's stringent indoor mask mandate today, ending a requirement that businesses ask customers for proof of full vaccination or require mask wearing at all times, and marking a turning point in the state's coronavirus response. The decision will eliminate a rule that prompted legal and interpersonal clashes over mask wearing, especially in conservative parts of New York. It was set to expire on Thursday and would have required renewing. Connecticut, Delaware, New Jersey, and Oregon announced Monday that masks will soon no longer be required indoors or in schools. California Governor Gavin Newsom, I don't like you, will let the state's indoor masking mandate end for vaccinated people on February 15th, although school children, because, they're so high risk, and the unvaccinated will still need to wear masks. In national news, several families whose loved ones died or were injured while trying to escape a smoke-filled Bronx apartment building sued the owners Tuesday, alleging safety violations that led to the wrongful deaths of 17 people, including 8 children. The 5 lawsuits were filed on behalf of the families by Benjamin Krupp, a civil liberties attorney based in Florida, and the New York law firm Wetz and Luxembourg. While the fire damaged only a small part of the building, it produced caustic smoke that quickly engulfed the complex. The suffocating smoke rose through a stairwell of the 19-story building and killed people as they attempted to flee. The parents of Amir Locke, a 22-year-old black man killed during a police raid in Minneapolis last week, are calling for an end to no-knock warrants in the city, describing them as a failure of law enforcement. Locke was shot as a SWAT team executed a warrant at an apartment last week. A short video clip of the incident shows police entering the apartment and shouting commands as Locke, who appeared to be sleeping, gets up holding a gun his family said he legally owned. Police then opened fire. He didn't even see what was coming. He didn't see who took his life. That's a quote from Locke's father. Describing how his son usually slept on his stomach with a cover over his head, Locke was not named in the warrant. Jamarl, I'm going to ask you to look up that video and see it for yourself, because I did in a previous hour. I'd like to come back to that.
Yeah.
In international news, the United States has approved a possible $100 million sale of equipment and services to Taiwan to, quote, sustain, maintain, and improve, end quote, its Patriot missile defense system. Essentially, the U.S. is saying that we owe you a Joe Rogan's amount of weapons if you pay that much, which also is another issue because historically Taiwan has paid way more for the weapons that we said you have to take.
Yeah. It's like, you need help? Oh, here's these weapons with the 20% markup.
Yeah. The Pentagon said on Monday, drawing an angry threat of retaliation from Beijing. China, which claims self-governed Taiwan as its own, routinely... Well, it's not just China who claims that. The U.S. officially doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country.
No, it doesn't. It's this kind of strategic ambiguity.
Which means that the U.S. is officially pumping weapons into a foreign adversary, which means officially the U.S. is beginning an act of war.
You could say that.
That means that we're putting weapons, if...
It's a strategic... Yes.
I know we don't want to make China upset by saying that, no, we recognize Taiwan as a country. But by not recognizing Taiwan as a country, you can't have it both ways, the U.S. You're pumping weapons and defense missiles
Yes.
and non-defense missiles
Yes.
in a Chinese territory then.
Yes.
If you don't recognize them as a country.
Yes.
And you're doing it right off the coast of the mainland.
Yes.
That's an act of war.
Yes. It is. I
You
agree.
can't have it both ways.
Well, that's what ambiguity is.
That's not now.
I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm not saying it's great. It's not. And yeah, even though we don't necessarily want to, we know that if the United States knows that if they tried to come with this notion that Taiwan is its own independent country, that China will respond. That's the red line, right? And so it's like dancing all the way up to the red line without going over it. It seems to be the game that we're playing in this. Not saying it's great. I mean, we look at it as a way of getting extra money from Taiwan for weapons that they claim they need in order to defend themselves from China. But Taiwan is China. So go for it.
Well, I would say that it's probably more on the side of an independent nation.
They want to think of themselves that way.
Exactly. And if they want to think of it and they have the majority of the population that think of it, shouldn't they be able to?
What about Texas? If Texas wanted to be its own state,
If they wanted
Texas
to
be able
secede?
leave? Yeah.
I mean, that's what...
We fought a war over that.
Yeah, exactly. State secession.
Just saying. We fought a war over that. I mean, I guess I'm making
it's a good point.
Yeah. I mean,
give you that.
At what point... Look, I'm not entirely clear on this myself, right? Like, at what point does a country become an individual thing unto itself? And I don't have an answer for that. And the situation seems to be different depending upon the country and who's the larger country. But at which point, meaning if Washington, D.C. said, we want to go our own separate way, should they be able to go their own separate way?
In that case, I would say no, because
Why?
because they're landlocked by an entire other country.
But there are plenty of other countries that are landlocked.
And it's also the capital of the United States of America. You can't have them go to another country. I get where you're going with it.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess my point is I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
And I don't.
It's almost like a case-by-case thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be a case-by-case thing. But China has imposed sanctions on Lockheed Martin and other U.S. companies in their part for selling weapons to Taiwan, though it is unclear what form the penalties have taken. Alberta and Saskatchewan on Tuesday announced plans to end their vaccination passport system and mask mandates, making them the first provinces to reveal when they would scrap those two coronavirus public health measures that are spurring protests across the country. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said his indoor masking requirement will be dropped at the end of the month, while Alberta Premier Jason Kenney said he will end the mask mandate for children next Monday. Both premiers said the usefulness of their vaccine passport system has ended and it's time to heal divisions in society over COVID-19 restrictions. In sports news, Lindsay Jacobellis won the gold medal in the women's snowboard cross event. This marks the first gold medal for Team USA in the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. The redemption for Jacobellis comes after a disappointing loss in 2006, where she celebrated too early and wiped out, giving the gold to Switzerland's Taha Frieden. Norway leads the games with 10 medals, 4 of them gold, and the U.S. is in 10th place with 7 medals, and the only 1 gold right now from Jacobellis. In business news, President Joe Biden publicly acknowledged Tesla for the first time in his presidency on Tuesday, noting the company's status as the nation's largest producer of electric vehicles. Biden's mention of Tesla came during a speech to promote American companies expanding the nation's EV infrastructure. Biden had avoided mentioning the company so far as president, a decision White House aides say is driven by his perception that Tesla is anti-union. The mention also comes after Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has spent months heavily criticizing, even trolling the president. That's just what Musk does. And other elected officials in the Democratic Party on Twitter and during press interviews. Musk's comments have ranged from calling Biden a damp sock puppet in human form to accusing the president of being controlled by unions. One of those things just doesn't belong here.
Right.
The other one hits pretty well. And in holiday news today is Chocolate Day. And in Lebanon, it's St. Maron's Day. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly.
I just watched that video. That video is disturbing. They're basically raiding that guy's house, running in with guns and everything else.
He was asleep on the couch.
Yeah. I sleep on the couch all the time, though. I mean,
I'm not saying that that's.
Oh no, I know.
I was just giving context.
It's like, how dare you, sir?
He slept on the couch with a blanket basically over his entire body. And I said it from the beginning, even by looking at the stats, the actual wording of this, not for this, he seems totally justified.
Yeah,
looking at the video, even more so.
It's worse. Yeah, and the video is rough. I mean, they're basically coming in, guns blazing, lights,
him
and
off
everything
of the
else.
couch, to which he goes, "What? There's someone right here," and then turns. They see the gun and open fire.
Yeah,
not for that at all.
Yeah, that's horrendous, man. I mean, Like I said, they should not. No knock warrants shouldn't exist. Or very,
so I did
very
do
limited.
a little bit of research. I know that I was saying that I could be convinced for or against.
Yeah.
Well, I would believe. I both believe and don't believe that it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? Because that protects against unlawful search and seizure.
Right.
I think. Well, is it unreasonable or unlawful a no-knock in any circumstance?
See, that's the thing.
What if
Any
we just
circumstance is too strong.
severely limit the amount we dole out?
It's that part. And it's like, if they severely limit it, are the cops still going to exploit it? Because keep in mind, they were no-knock warrants.
No, they're not. They can't, because a judge has to grant the warrant. The cops can't give it to themselves.
No, they can't necessarily give it to themselves, but they can definitely exploit it. Meaning, one of the provisions for the no-knock warrants, meaning there was a question of whether no-knocks were legal in the first place.
Right.
And eventually the judge gave them a little bit of leeway with this notion that, well, you may have drug dealers and you may have this, and so you can use it in these particular situations. But the cops still were using it willy-nilly, so it wasn't, meaning they could always say, well, this was the situation that you guys gave us and we're using it for the situation. Meaning, how do you constrain them the moment that you give them that capability to do it?
I've said time and time again, and this is just another way of doing it. You want to fix the cops? Fix the justice system. If you want, you hold the cops accountable that are doing racist acts and just overtly violent acts.
I don't even think this was racist.
Put them in jail.
Horrible.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either at the time. Put them in jail. Set a hard precedent. Okay, at the same time, your precedent is to not give out no knocks unless it's a very serious issue, like if it's a terrorist cell and they're preparing to do something. Okay, let's give a no knock. Other than that, let's severely limit.
Because you can't have it both ways, man. You can't have a country that is awash in guns and then have cops barging into the house. And you're telling the cops, yes, you can shoot if somebody shoots at you. However, when you're barging into the house, the people have no idea. I mean, if somebody barged into my house, I have a shotgun at home. What am I going to think?
You do?
Yeah. I like guns. I like shooting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so it's like, well,
we should go to
I don't
the
want to be
range.
too strong on that, but I do
should go
like
to the range.
I do like shooting, going to the range. Yeah. And so it's like, if somebody comes into the house, I am completely justified in defending my life and defending myself.
Honestly, it depends. In D.C., not all the time. There is no castle doctrine in D.C.
If somebody is trying to take my life, I have the right to defend myself.
If they're trying to take your life, yes. If they're trying to take your possessions, then it gets sticky.
I know, but if somebody is raiding my house, I have no way to know the difference in those things.
Argue it in court because people have won and lost. They've won and lost, my man. And I am for you, but still, and in the moment, it's really hard to tell.
How can you tell? You're just waking up.
Oh, yeah.
You hear commotion.
Yeah.
Somebody's in the house.
In this case, yeah.
What am I doing in this situation, right? Am I reaching for the gun because I think, oh my God, I'm being raided? And what if it's a bad neighborhood? Like, it's posed for the moment. I don't know what neighborhood is this guy's in, but I don't know how many good neighborhoods are being raided by cops. And so it's like all of those things, none of those things into the betterment of the situation. It's like they're putting themselves in a situation where the person can credibly and legitimately respond with force. By the same token, the cop can also respond with force.
So what about, okay, what do you think about, have you ever heard of quick knock? Quick knock warrants.
I don't know what quick knock, like bang, bang, bang. And then
No. They make their presence known. They knock, police, open up, SWAT, LAPD, whatever.
Yeah.
They wait between 15 and 20 seconds of notice, and then they can bust in.
That's better than the other one. I mean, the catch is the person going to hear him when they say it, or is the cop just going to say, no, really, I did give a quick notice? Like in the Breonna Taylor thing, they insist, oh, we did announce ourselves.
I'm also all for, hey, let's have every cop have body camera. That as soon as an incident is over, okay, it gets uploaded.
Agreed. 1,000% agree with that. 1,000% agree.
Cool.
Because at that point, that solves
then
the
you
issue
can hear,
of whether
knock,
they...
knock, knock,
exactly.
Police, open up.
Exactly.
Police, we have you surrounded. Police, open the door. We will bust this open.
Yeah.
10 seconds later.
I think cops should identify themselves. I mean, 1,000%.
I don't think, because, I guess my biggest gripe in the past when I had talked about this in the first hour was, I'm a huge precedent guy.
Right.
And to totally get rid of no knock, I see could have a lot of bad implications.
Yeah.
But if we severely limit it,
bad implications.
If we severely, but yeah, this is a horrible situation that came from a no-knock warrant, and we both agree the cops might have done a little bit wrong after seeing the video, but from protocol,
their jobs.
From protocol wise, they didn't do anything wrong.
They're allowed to do this.
And Amir, right? Amir is his name. Amir didn't do anything wrong either.
Nope.
So that means that there's a breakdown on that protocol.
Yes, exactly.
So we can agree on that. So let's just, I as a precedent, I'm skeptical of totally getting rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we have known terrorist cells or something like that.
But I accept your skepticism towards no-knock warrants. I accept that. I accept that. I appreciate that.
I've evolved within an hour.
No, I mean, even in the beginning, though, you were skeptical of this one. You're like, oh, God, that looks bad. This does not look great. I mean, look, if you have a situation where everybody behaves correctly and people still die, then there's something wrong with that policy.
Correct.
So
I agree.
Yeah. Let's do this. Let's go to our guests. You guys are listening to Fault Lines, Thomas and Pelly. There was a great article in the New York Times talking about MMT. And they were asking this notion about Stephanie Kelton because she's kind of the poster child or poster woman for it. And so their thing was, look, are these the limits of MMT? We're seeing all of this inflation. There's all of this spending. This is not necessarily going well. So our next guest is a proponent of MMT, Steve Grumbine. He's a friend of the show. I've had him on plenty of times. He's a great guy. And so he wants to basically push back on this article talking about it. And he's going to give a defense from MMT against the New York Times. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Modern monetary theory, that's what it's basically called. And our next guest is a proponent of it, and this is something he would argue is being used all the time. It's basically this notion of spending, and not necessarily spending with this idea of using taxes in order to fund debt and everything else, but basically spending up into the level that your government can afford to spend. And the number, mostly, is when you start seeing inflation. I'm going to let him spin it. He's going to give a far better explanation than I do. And I'm kind of hesitant to give an explanation because I want him to basically give a little bit more detail in regards to what it is before we get into the basis of the conversation. But just think of it as, under normal circumstances, the notion of spending and using taxes to fund it, they would argue that taxes don't fund spending. That spending by the federal government is done when the federal government says spend. When Congress says spend money, the government spends. Taxes are basically used to pull money out of the economy, not necessarily in order to pay for bills. There's a difference in those things. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Steve Grumbine. He's a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively, dedicated to education, advocacy of modern monetary theory. And Steve, I didn't do a great job explaining that, but I'm going to get back into it. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. And actually, your second shot at that wasn't. I was like, wow, okay, that was pretty good. That second go at it.
Taxes don't fund spending.
Good, Jamarl.
That's basically what they say, right? Taxes don't fund spending. And this notion that oftentimes there's this belief that, you know, debt is a problem, the deficit is a problem. And MMT doesn't look at it that way. MMT looks at it and says, well, we're a fiat currency, so it's not like we're on a gold standard. And because we're on a fiat currency, we have more leeway and latitude in which to basically spend. And you spend up into the level of real resources. So when you think of real resources, it's basically the point in which you start getting inflation. Now, the article that I sent you in the New York Times basically had the picture of Stephanie Kelton. And it was basically asking this question, have we reached the limits of modern monetary theory? So, for example, the money that we spend on the military, well, that money is not necessarily paid for. That's basically monetary theory. Same thing with the money that we were spending for the COVID stuff. Again, that wasn't money that was requisitioned or paid for. That was money that the government just kind of spent into action by basically allocating the funds for it. But since we're seeing this level of inflation that is taking place, are we at the limits of this level of spending? And also, before you even go into it, I kind of want you to give a better explanation of what MMT is for people who aren't familiar with this kind of mindset.
Sure. So what is really important is to understand that MMT is an entire lens about economics. It's not just about, God, I hate to say it, but I'll use it for everyone's benefit, printing money or, taxes don't fund spending. These are all truisms, but they're not MMT. MMT is a much broader understanding of the way economics works. It describes currency, no matter whether it's on the gold standard or whether it's a full fiat currency and everywhere in between. So what MMT does is gives you a lens to understand the conditions and the parameters that you're under, which the mainstream has gotten wrong for so long. And my tagline on Twitter is austerity is murder. Well, they've used austerity because of the faulty understanding of economics for so long that we've seen more death in the world based on this neoliberal paradigm that has been around for the last 40 or 50 years. And ultimately, MMT seeks to undo the damage of faulty economics and provide us a framework. It's not telling you to spend. That MMT never says that. MMT never says just print money. MMT never says any of those things.
Now, what's the faulty framework? Explain that for the audience.
So first things first, the idea of bond sales and debt, let's start there, right? The government sells bonds to take money out of the economy, not to fund spending. And so the wealthy end up using this to buy bonds so that they can get a safe investment to hedge against more speculative investments. They love bonds because bonds are what backstops every risk they take. But it doesn't have anything to do with funding our government. This is an anachronism from the gold standard era when we had to sell stuff because the more dollars you quote unquote printed against a fixed pool of gold would quote unquote debase that currency. So to offset that, they would sell bonds to pull money out of the economy to maintain the quote unquote value of the dollar. Well, we're not on a commodity anymore. There's nothing about it that's a commodity-backed currency. It's fully free-floating, meaning it rises and falls based on certain parameters. But ultimately, at the end, the dollar is simply a tax credit that the government agrees to accept $1 in tax payment for $1 paid. And that's it. That's your MMT story. There's a lot more to it than that, but in the spirit of time, the bottom line is our government creates that currency every time, not sometimes. Like even when we were saying that taxes were funding spending, even when we would raise taxes to quote unquote pay for we're still doing MMT. Not doing MMT, you don't do MMT. It just is reality. It's like the lens by which you can understand what was happening. So let's flash forward to the article that you put forward. And that article had it wasn't all horrible. I mean, there was a lot of really good statements in there. The problem with the article, though, ultimately, is they start talking about, how inflation comes to be and how these things happen. And they basically tried to put it on MMT to say, hey, is this a test of MMT? Is this an experiment of MMT? Now, if you don't know anything about MMT and you're still talking about MMT says printing money and borrowing money and stuff like that. Well, you're not talking MMT. You're talking neoclassical economics, and you're trying to shoehorn a bad understanding into an MMT framework. So you've never seen policy. You've never seen policy written as if it were an MMT policy. You've never seen MMT economists running the economy. You see neoclassical people playing games and just spending because they knew that if they didn't spend, the economy would completely tank.
So Stephen, if overnight MMTers took over the Fed, and a bunch of economists, right? You guys, we all got on the same page. What would that look like in today's inflation rates that we have as crazy and today's value of the dollar?
Well, so a couple things would take place. Number one, MMT would absolutely push back and do a zero interest rate policy at the Fed. We would stop selling bonds. We would turn it into a 3-month bonds at best, 3-month debt instruments instead of these long-term debt instruments. But ultimately, we would have a permanent zero interest rate policy that would eliminate those interest payments on quote unquote bonds. We'd get rid of it altogether.
Isn't the zero interest policy what got us here with inflation?
No, not at all. In fact, let's talk about that for a minute. So what do you think is causing inflation? Let's look at Russia and let's look at Saudi Arabia. Let's start there. There is nothing that says that gas needed to go up or down in price. This is a human being that raised prices. This is gouging because they know that they can. So there's number one on the gas side. There's no shortage there. There's no nothing. The price has gone up. You see what they did to Venezuela when they literally dropped the price down to nothing to literally strap them with unsustainable foreign debt. That was a move that they do. That was all manipulated. So the gas prices are manipulated as well, coming from both Russia and Saudi Arabia. They have jacked these prices up, and there's no increase in demand. The demand that we see, there's no demand push for the inflation to happen. Warren Mosler put out a great graph the other day on Twitter that showed no demand issue. So this isn't a demand issue, must be something else. And that something else is gouging. There's no demand issue on housing. You know, you've got people buying these houses up and raising the price because they can. This is capitalism's backlash to trying to take care of the people. They know there's additional money, so they are gouging. Has nothing to do with printing money, has nothing to do with some natural hand of Adam Smith coming in and making inflation happen. This is 100% man-made on one level.
That's okay,
now you asked me what would happen.
No, go ahead. You say on one level. What's the other level?
You asked me to explain what it would look like if MMT economists were in the Fed, et cetera, and making policies. Well, the first thing that would have happened is over the pandemic, you would have had a job guarantee instituted immediately. So everybody that got pulled from the payroll would have been given a job in their local community, whether it be working from home, calling on elderly to make sure that they're okay. Maybe they were playing virtual chess with the elderly. Maybe they were running supplies to pay, whatever. There would have been a local job guarantee, federally funded, locally administered, that would have taken away any kind of bottoming out effect.
During the pandemic?
During the pandemic, absolutely. And there's no reason that somebody has to physically be in the field doing stuff. We're a different society. We can do all manner of work. We can do all kinds of things that have nothing to do with spreading the disease, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But we would have also instituted a host of other things. Like, for example, I mean, we may have put rent control out there. We may have put a cap on rent control. We may have gone ahead and put a land value tax in place to prevent speculation on property. We may have done a host of things that would have taken the edge off the ability for these capitalists to jack prices up. But you have another thing, too, and this is something that should be on the tip of everyone's tongue, and that is during the pandemic, what we ended up happening was our supply chains broke down.
Right.
So you're dealing with an entire system of global supply chain management where many of the countries were in lockdown, were unable to send out goods and services from their country, huge delays in semiconductors, et cetera, that created inflation as well. So you've got ships that are backed up, et cetera. Anyway.
So it's not entirely this notion of people jacking up price, even though I grant that that's some of it. Some of the stuff had to do with basically shocks to price because of supply chain breaks, issues associated with COVID, changes in work habits, and everything else. I guess your point is this is not indicative of the limits of MMT in this sense, meaning we're not encountering inflation because people were spending money to the hilt. That's the way you're putting it.
Exactly.
But
that's exactly correct.
But under that model, let's say everything you're saying is true. An MMT program now and cutting the interest rates to zero that would basically increase the amount of inflation, correct? I mean, puts me in mind of the experiment taking place.
I'm glad you said that.
Well, wait. This puts me in mind of the experiment taking place in Turkey, where Erdogan, in his mind, he's like, well, Islamic law doesn't necessarily like usury, and so I don't necessarily like raising interest rates. And because I don't like raising interest rates, he decided to cut rates, meaning he's basically breaking this kind of economic orthodoxy, and in doing so, have his currency basically falling apart. The currency is being devalued. So I guess what I'm saying is, wouldn't the same thing happen here? I mean,
that's a whole different subject. And if we want to do a show on Erdogan and Turkey, we can do that. But right now, to be fair, the fact is they're not one and the same. This is again kind of like what they were saying is, hey, you're doing MMT. Has MMT met its limits? Well, no, you didn't do MMT, and neither did Turkey. Turkey didn't do MMT. There's a lot there. They have foreign debt that has nothing to do with their own currency. There's a host of other issues that have nothing whatsoever to do with the standard trope about printing money and all that stuff. None of this stuff. Believe me, I thought when I walked into that, I was like, oh, here we go. They're going to say MMT once again, but it's not MMT. And again, I'm not prepared to go into the Turkey thing in the short time we have.
No, I don't expect that.
Okay, but flipping this around, the idea here is interest rates. I did a great podcast with the father of MMT, Warren Mosler, on interest rate policy. And interest rate policy does two things. Number one, it raises the price of credit, which by its very definition raises the price of goods sold, which by its very definition is either a relative value story or inflation. Okay, so raising interest rates, unless those interest rates are raised like to 50%, some weird, radical, huge uptick that makes it so that people won't buy anything, and that stops consumption like dead in its tracks, that's one thing. You raise it 2%, guess what? You're going to add 2% inflation. That's what raising interest rates do. Interest rate raises the cost of doing business. It's immediate. Whatever the percentage you raised it on that raises the cost of doing business right there.
I know, but
so this is a very faulty understanding. MMT would not go to monetary policy to have anything to do with the economy. We wouldn't even give a crap about that. We literally, interest rates are like giving a kid in the passenger seat a fake toy steering wheel and said, okay, you can drive us to the vacation.
Well, the point of raising interest rates is to cut down on the amount that people basically borrow. I mean, the idea behind it, as you know, I'm not telling you anything, but basically this notion that, okay, people are borrowing too much, the economy is running too hot, we need to cut down on the amount of money that people are basically borrowing and whatnot. And so it's not so much that each random individual is having an increase in what they're doing. They're trying to get people who are basically borrowing money and spending that money. Meaning, because some people were basically borrowing money and spending money on stocks, for example. And so they will buy back their own stocks in order to inflate the value of their stock price. Well, they were doing that because money was so cheap at the time. I think the interest rates were basically at zero. So they could basically do that without losing anything in doing so. And so the whole point of it is or you just don't accept that.
Right. So the way I heard it was the reason why, I mean, the zero interest rate had contributed to where we're at now is because with zero interest rates, anyone can basically fill their pockets, pad their pockets. And when everyone has buying power, no one has buying power. So it raises the inflation. And then that basically means that what you borrowed at $100,000, because the money is devalued, it ends up, the banks actually end up losing out on the money when you pay it back eventually, because you only have to pay back $100,000, but that dollar is worth a lot less. And for low income, what are we at for on an average, like 7% inflation rate right now?
7 or 8.
Right, which hits higher. A lot harder for the lower class. So how is a 0% inflation rate supposed to, or a 0% interest rate supposed to fix that?
So first of all, I reject the notion that the amount of money in the system devalues it. I blatantly reject that right-wing thinking. I don't subscribe to it. It's Milton Friedman. It's been debunked. It's quantity theory of money, and it's absolutely incorrect. That would be number one. Number two is the regular people, Jane and Joe Sixpack, did not get all that extra buying power. That money was left at the top of the food chain.
Right.
You saw wealth gap grow exponentially. Okay, you saw a huge sucking sound all the way to the top of the food chain, where the richest got super rich. Now, let me tell you what you could see in that environment. Okay, what you could see in that environment is what I stated in the beginning about getting rid of the speculative real estate because of the games they're playing. But what you can see at the very top is the wealthy playing Game of Thrones with asset bubbles. Now, all of a sudden, you can get into bidding wars at the top of the food chain when it comes to the assets, these capital assets. But that's not touching Main Street. That's not touching Jane and Joe Sixpack when they're buying a loaf of bread. What's happening with Jane and Joe Sixpack, the real economy, the working, functioning economy, is that price gouging has taken place, and it's verifiable. This is not even, I mean, even some of the worst actors have even come out and said, yeah, you know what? Yeah, it is gouging. This is the revolt of capital. The capital is saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and get ours. Now, I'm going to go back to the question you had asked originally, which was what it would look like. And we did another deep dive into nationalizing payroll over the pandemic, for example. We would have kept everyone at home. We would have maintained the pay of the individuals that work. We would have taken over that for a period of time. We would have let everyone stay home during that period of time.
But all those jobs not all those jobs can operate from home.
Oh, no. We would have paid them point blank for staying at home during that period of time. There would have been a temporary pandemic kind of payout as opposed to a quote unquote perpetual UBI.
So you're going to pay people the standard amount for staying home. So what about those? So what about those people that need to stock grocery shelves? What about firefighters? What about police officers and things like that? So I get the whole consistent level of pay across the spectrum, but a lot of these jobs have to be in person. Gas station attendants.
Absolutely. Yep. First responders, all that stuff. Absolutely. Again, you're talking about supply chains. And so when you start talking about supply chains, now you're talking about where the real limits of MMT kick in. MMT is all about the availability of real resources. So if the real resources aren't there, you're going to have problems. It's not a monetary phenomenon, though, right? Hyperinflation is not a monetary phenomenon. Hyperinflation in all the standard places, I've said this a bunch of times, but I'll say it for this show, Weimar Republic, you had a shutdown of the industrial sector. You had a debt denominated in French francs, foreign debt. The Germans literally had lost the ability to produce the real resources needed. And so before any money was printed, you had hyperinflation because there was literally one loaf of bread because production had come to a standstill. Right. You look at Zimbabwe, similar thing. Mugabe had taken all the farmland, all the productive farmland away from the colonizing white farmers, given it to the indigenous folks, the warlords, et cetera, who didn't have great farming skills. And ultimately, as they walked out the door, the British set fire to those fields. So they lost their food sovereignty immediately before the hyperinflation ever kicked in.
This is not a monetary issue. This is a lack of supply issue. That's your point.
Exactly. Yes.
So does that mean that if everything was fine and dandy in the States and we put in MMT, it would work? But then at the current to a little bit past situation we've been in with supply chain breaks, MMT would not work in America.
No, MMT works even there too. That's what I'm trying to say. MMT is a lens. You don't do MMT. This is. I hope that anybody that's listening to me will hear me. You don't do MMT. You can't implement MMT. MMT is a description. Even if you do the dumbest, most ridiculous thing, MMT will describe the dumbest, most ridiculous thing. You can do MMT, as they say, really badly. But the point I'm making here is that, quote unquote, an MMT-informed policy proposal, an MMT-informed, approach to monetary policy, an MMT-informed approach to developing policy would start with making sure you have the real resources there. So, take Medicare for all, great one, because everybody wants Medicare for all. Even, a lot of Republicans even want it, okay? But MMT would say, if you don't have the real resources for it, that could cause supply chain breakdowns.
Right.
Okay, that could cause bottlenecks in the system that could create delays and it could create higher costs. So how would you maybe take care of producing universal health care with an MMT lens? Well, you would want to make sure you had clinics built throughout the country in these areas where there's like 2 and 3 hour drives to get to a doctor. You would want to make sure you have a training program to get more doctors into the fold. You want to make funding available for more nurses. You would incentivize the real resources to come into that sector before you go ahead and pass a big bill that really, really exploits the weaknesses of your current infrastructure. So MMT would look at this as a real resource constraint and say, hey, we want to do this in phases, and here's how we would do it. We want to make sure that we are not spending beyond the ability for us to deliver the goods and services that would be required.
That makes sense.
So
let's say
that's really what it comes down to.
So let's say it was school, for example, and it was universal school. And there was a situation that says, okay, well, everybody now and their mama can go to school. Well, do we have enough classes? Do we have enough books? Do we have enough seats? Do we have enough tables? And if any of those things are in lack, it's going to create an inflation in the cost of those items. So wood may spike because of the amount of wood that's being used in order to create desks and books, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's your thought.
Or virtual classrooms.
Or
right?
virtual classrooms.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at, like, I'm a business guy. I'm a project manager by trade. So I look at when I'm doing a project, right, which is not different than implementing a policy proposal, right? If you gave me Institute Medicare for All, Steve, you're the project manager, go make it happen, right? I would have to do all the requirements gathering. I'd have to design the system, because the bill itself isn't going to really design. That's just going to give you the high-level requirements for what that design would be.
But
I would then, in turn, have to work to design the system soup to nuts.
But
that would require resources.
But I think therein lies the difficulty of it. Because even if Biden or if any of these guys come out with a particular policy, they're not necessarily going to push through to ensure that the real resources are there for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the issue, right?
Yeah, so what I would say is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know you probably will anyway, but if we were to look at the economy through an MMT lens and not do MMT, wouldn't that mean, though, that we have to have essentially a perfect supply system? And we would have to have a perfect neighborhood system where everyone has access to a grocery store right next to them. Everyone has a bank right next to them that they can walk to. Everyone has resources that are right at the tip of their finger, which we just don't have in this country, and I would argue that almost no country has a perfect system like that. So how would it work in practice?
So obviously we have degrees of good, right? I mean, we're talking about spectrum here. I mean, like, you do the best you can with the tools you have, right? So if I only have a small amount of resources, I'm going to build a policy based on the resources I have, not create a policy that doesn't meet with the resources that I'm trying to summon here, okay? But we know, at least I think most people know, that we have the manufacturing capacity. Even though we've sent the quote-unquote jobs overseas, we didn't give up the capital internally to this country. We have the capability to do just about anything we want. If we can dream it, if we can resource it, we can afford it. That's the Keynes. John Maynard Keynes said that way back before MMT was even a thought in anyone's mind, okay? And so you go through all the different stages, functional finance, Abba Lerner, Minsky, all these people throughout history, okay, that have kind of built on top of this knowledge. And MMT encapsulates that. Plus, it gives you the plumber's manual on how the federal finance system actually works. So what you're saying, to optimize the economy to be perfect, yes, but we would advocate all those things you said. We would strive to find a way to give postal banking to make sure everyone has access to the underbanked. So underbanked people would no longer be underbanked. We would make sure that we incentivize the creation of grocery stores or whatever it is that, whatever we're lacking, we would redirect. That's the point of the government having the tax. The tax allows the government to provision itself. So assuming, again, best case scenario, MMTers are in the house, we're going to design that system with the real resources in mind, first and foremost. It's not going to be an afterthought like Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden is a neoliberal.
But
and that's why he's not, quote unquote, doing MMT.
But I think you'd,
I mean, like,
but I think you'd accept that Okay, fair enough. I don't think Joe Biden is going in with the thought that he's doing MMT. But I think you'd agree with me that one of the provisions or one of the notions is this notion of sovereign currency. And any currency that's requisitioned within its own, meaning if a government is requisitioning money for its own thing, it can basically pay for whatever it wants. The U.S. makes dollars, so the U.S. can pay for anything that's denominated in dollars. But at the same token, though, by your own admission on this, we don't have a great supply chain system. Oftentimes we have this kind of last minute supply chains, basically, where that stuff is stretched out, where it's only like maybe a week of inventory for any particular item. And so we are always kind of at this notion of potentially having lack or potentially missing out on something. And so even though Biden wasn't necessarily formally doing MMT, he was spending, and he was basically spending money in order to deal with issues of COVID or other issues of, housing or whatever he was basically putting money into. I mean, that is going to generate inflation by definition, right? I mean, even because I guess my point to you is, no, he's not doing MMT in the traditional sense of the word. They are, however, spending, which is one of those aspects of MMT, which is probably where the article is coming in. I agree with you. The article is not exactly accurate because what's taking place is not really a show of MMT and what people would do under that model. But the article is trying to make this point of saying we are seeing inflation. And even though some of it can be bought into people gouging, agreed, but the supply chain breaks are one of those things that is basically creating this kind of increase in the amount of items because people don't have access or can't get their hands on those items, which is bidding up the price of those items.
So you could look at this and say, okay, here's this negative thing. Or you could say that what MMT has just shown you, the MMT scholarship has just shown you, is that instead of focusing on the monetary issues, which are stupid, stop worrying about bonds, stop talking nonsense about interest rates. Focus yourself instead on how do we create policy that makes sure that we have the real resources available? How do we fix our supply chain? That's where the problem is.
Yeah.
Right? This is the problem that we need to be solving. Instead, we've got the people, and it's typically the bond vigilantes and other folks that are trying to do this because they know that if we spend money on the people, guess what's not going to happen? They're not going to need to go to the bank to borrow money. And if you just read in the newspaper yesterday, this year, and this is funny, this is a sidebar, but it's incredibly in line with what we're talking about. We have private debt for the first time ever. Consumer debt has risen to $15+ trillion this year. Last year, in 2020, it said, and I pulled two articles up side by side. 2020, they said, oh my goodness, private debt has risen, consumer debt has risen to a record high of 14 trillion. This year, it's risen to a record of 15 trillion.
Wow.
Private debt is a real constraint because guess what? If people don't have the money to spend on new goods and services, you are going to hit deep recessionary problems. This is a very much a stock flow consistent modeling, but you understand that if you don't offset private debt with public spending, private debt will clamp you down. This is why removing student debt is such a vital factor for this economy to be effective.
Yeah.
And to really make it open for all people to participate in. So private debt is a real thing, man. And that is really the kind of focus we should be zeroing in on is how do we make it so that people are taken care of, they can pay their electric bill, they can eat, they can have food, they can have the basic needs taken care of without it completely slagging them and burning them out and destroying them.
You're speaking my language.
And
you're definitely speaking my language on that one.
This is right where we need to be focused on. And this is what MMT would tell you. If we spend targeted spending, if we spend at the top and just give Halliburton $750 million for our military stuff, but we never spend it on regular people with electric supplements or getting rid of student debt or giving universal health care or any of this stuff to help the regular people. Instead, they end up bankrupt because they got cancer.
Yeah.
So this is you only get money from three places. Number one, you borrow it from a bank. Number two, your government spends it on you directly. And number three, you sell goods and services abroad and you get imports or export money coming in. Those are your three ways of getting it. Investment money is the same thing as working. But when you think about this, the economy is directly impacted also by the most bizarre thing you'll ever hear, saving. you imagine that saving is antithetical to a good functioning economy? Can you imagine that saving is actually a demand leakage that you have to offset, similar to being a net importer that spends 500 trillion or 500 billion over and above your export? That's 500 billion leaving your economy.
Yeah.
Well, people offshore their money, that's money leaving the economy. People save that money, it's money leaving the economy.
Yeah.
And so,
what is it? The momentum of money or something they call it. Basically, the speed at which money goes. Yeah, velocity of money. That's it. The speed at which money goes through the economy. Steve, one last question before we leave. They're planning on increasing interest rates. So what do you think is going to take place after they do that? In fact, it may be more than once at this point, especially with the amount of inflation that's apparently taking place. What do you think? What's the prognostication on what's going to take place after that?
I think what you're going to see is, number one, they're going to jack up interest rates. And then all of a sudden, the Joe Manchins of the world that are talking about worrying about the debt and stuff like that are going to start doing their peacock dance. And you're going to see a massive recession, and they're going to try and blame it on spending. But in reality, it was about the stupid interest rates, and it was about austerity, which is what Manchin's all about. Let's go ahead and cut spending. Once that starts happening, you get into the Bill Clinton era. Remember what poor brother Bill did to, I hate to give George W. Bush any credit at all, but George W. Bush inherited a recession from Bubba, who did the whole dumb, let's balance the budget, but instead they had a surplus. Well, that surplus, there's not some bankroll fat stacks like Breaking Bad sitting there in the government coffer. Government neither has money nor does. They spend it into existence.
Your point is that
So
surplus was basically
deleted
our
from the
cash.
economy.
Yeah, it was basically money taken out of the economy at that point.
Exactly. So it was devastating. And how bad is it you got to defend George W. Bush from Bill Clinton? But you do. Because the fact is that his recession was bought and paid for by everybody's celebrated balanced budget. That was the biggest. And there's a great article. Look for it. It's on Business Insider a few years ago, quoting Stephanie Kelton about the Goldilocks economy and about how when he balanced that budget, it literally destroyed the economy. And they give you the math, too. If you're interested in the math, it's in that article.
Steve,
so definitely check it out.
Thank you, my man. I remember seeing the charts for that, where the person would show how the money that the government spends is basically going into the pocket of private owners, meaning what the government spends, we get. What the government has as a surplus, we lose. And that money the kind of back and forth program. And the charts are astonishing when you see kind of side-by-side analysis that Stephanie Kelton gave at one or two of her lectures. Steve,
absolutely.
Thank you, my man. I appreciate you joining us today. The voice you guys are listening to is Steve Grumbine. He's a political, economic, and social justice activist and founder of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, a 501c3 and 501c4, respectively dedicated to education and advocacy for modern monetary theory. You can follow Steve on Twitter at SDGrumbine and at Real Progress US. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment. We'll be taking your calls for about 5 or 6 minutes. The number is 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. It's time for the wrap, and we are taking your calls. The number is 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. I want to kick us off with a story that's come to my attention about nursing. I've been pretty interested. I've got some friends in nursing, and they are kind of under non-disclosure agreements, so they can't really come on.
You were saying they were using,
but something's been going on
nurses as opposed to
exactly.
Nurses,
so something's going on where hospitals have been refusing to pay nurses more for more work that they're doing.
Right.
Because hospitals are scheduling them for 18, 20 hours for a shift.
Yeah.
And then they're saying, and for 6-7 days a week, they're saying, okay, this is exhausting, but I know we're in a pandemic. At the very least, pay us more.
Right.
They said no. So a lot of these nurses quit their current hospital, but they're still registered nurses. and then they become what are called traveling nurses. The hospitals will then hire them back. Either the same hospital or one down the street will hire them back at a higher rate because now they're being represented by a traveling nursing group.
Yep.
Which is basically like, and it's at a higher rate than what the nurses were asking for originally as a pay bump. So it's either you become a traveling nurse and get way more money, most of the time not even having to travel, or you stay on because you're loyal. And they're just screwing over their nurses that they have on call on staff.
Yeah.
Recently, hospitals have banded together, and now they're trying to push legislation, across that bars the cap of what traveling nurses can request and make.
Wow.
So instead of actually addressing the issue that you caused,
they're going through the legal
of
system.
just increasing your nurses' wages. And then the traveling nurses ends because no one wants to be a traveling nurse and being called to here and there. I mean, not no one, but like the majority of these people took the job at the hospital for a reason.
Right.
Instead of doing that, they're going to take away the money from the traveling nurses, so no one wins.
They're basically trying to have a maximum wage on nursing.
Yes, and we have callers I want to get to, but it is a horrible situation. I will continue to look into it and
That
report.
is tremendously horrible.
It is. Instead of doing the simpler thing of just actually paying your nurses more for more work that they're doing.
Let's be very clear. It's not like the hospitals are getting hurt financially. I mean, the hospitals are making gangbusters at this point. I mean, they've been jam-packed.
Yes.
I mean, the drug companies have been making gangbusters in regards to money. So it's not like they don't have the money to basically pay for it. No,
Yes,
that's
it is
horrendous.
deplorable. We will keep reporting on it when we see it. But for now, we got Mark calling in from New York. Mark, you're on the line. What's on your mind, man?
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm glad to hear you both in discussion as usual. I just wanted to comment. I'm glad you also saw the video. I was urging your producer to, or I had asked early when I didn't get in, if you had seen the video of the young man who was shot.
That video is horrible.
With the no-knock warrant.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing about that is it mentioned that, and even the language used, they were serving a warrant on the address. No, warrants are gotten based on the criminal you're pursuing.
Right.
At the address, yes, but it's not on the address. So we need to be mindful of the language and how we describe this because it suggests that the intel was defective and flawed in the first place. And
Well, if it's deceptive and flawed, then let's not issue a no-knock.
Yeah.
I've evolved it since the first hour, as I've been saying. I understand how dangerous it can be. So let's severely limit unless we know 100% of the details or it's a actual national security threat, which someone was also saying, well, then that wouldn't even be local police. Okay.
Fine with that. Totally fine with that.
Let's look into that.
I mean, that was the Breonna Taylor thing, right? They had gotten, word from the post office or something that something was going down. I mean, whatever it was, they were entirely and completely wrong. And she lost her life for it and then couldn't even prosecute the people for basically killing her because basically the cops technically didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, and someone else was saying, too, that like negotiations work out way better than no-knock warrants.
Yes.
Even if it takes 4, 6, 8 hours.
At least you keep the person alive.
Hostage situation.
Yeah.
Fine. Mark, though, thank you for the call. We did look at the video, and we did get the message from the producer, so thank you very much for the call. Let's go now to Skip in D.C. Skip, you're on the line. What's on your mind, man?
Hey, what's up, y'all? What a great conversation. He's just so articulate and calm, you know, and in the way he explains stuff. And you guys, of course, the back and forth was great. I wanted to, if he was still on, and just to sort of put this out there, sort of a burning question is, how do we address the price gouging across industries? And whether that be domestically or even internationally. I wanted to put that out there.
That's a good question. And we're going to have to get to that next time we either bring Steve or even Mark from Frost to come on to explain it. Yeah, Steve is a great guy. And I don't always agree with him.
No, I appreciate his take. I appreciated the pushback. And I don't think I often like to argue the devil's advocate position if no one takes it. I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough on MMT to argue his position for him. So
I got to be honest, neither am I. I mean, I know the basics, but I don't necessarily can't anywhere near the way that Steve can get into it and explain that stuff. But thank you, guys. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank our engineer, our producer. I want to thank my co-host, Austin Pelly. And I want to thank all of you for listening. You guys have a phenomenal day, and we will see you bright and early in the morning. Fault lines, signing off.
Spaghetti Man signing off.